It's my pleasure to get to welcome everyone to our East Central Community of Practice's fall gathering. ECCoP is the successor to the old East Central region. Folks in the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan geographical region and that old East Central region really valued the collegiality and the interactions that we had in the region. And so we set up as a community of practice and we're carrying this forward. The great thing with communities of practice is that even as folks move out of the territory of what would have been the region, they are still able to continue meeting with us. And so we have members of our COP now in Florida and North Carolina and other places. And we are, because we are meeting virtually due to COVID, we're able to extend a welcome to our ACPE colleagues and spiritual care colleagues, pastoral counseling colleagues and whatnot, all across the country. And we have registrants from far and wide. So welcome to each and every one of you as you are joining with us today. Our East Central Community of Practice typically gathers twice a year, kind of like the old region did, with a fall meeting and a spring meeting. And so that's what we are doing here today. It's what would have been our fall meeting. We had really hoped that we would have been able to be in person at Houston Woods in Ohio, but clearly due to the surge in the Delta variant of the pandemic, we have clearly moved online. So that does enable us to welcome more folks from across the country to join with today. So welcome. We're going to get started. Ben Eiton, who is one of the certified educators at Ohio Health here in Columbus, Ohio, is going to be facilitating a gathering reflection for us. After that, Les Small Stokes will be going over some of our details of the day-to-day housekeeping and how we're going to handle question and response times, and then we'll introduce our speaker, and Dr. Amani Jones will take it from there. So that's kind of our structure. I did post the schedule for the day into the chat feature up at the top. So if you kind of want to track along with that, you'll just need to open up the chat window and scroll up to the top to see what the flow and structure for our day will be. So Ben, thank you for facilitating our reflection this morning, and I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start this morning with a guided reflection that comes out of the work of UC Berkeley and some of the research they're doing there on psychology and positive psychology and the power of mindfulness. And this is called a compassion meditation, and it is typically supposed to take like half an hour, but we're going to do an abbreviated version, a 5-minute or less version. But if you will join me in taking a deep breath, closing your eyes. That's me.
Rejoining your call. I'm holding your call.
The world wanting to create distractions for us in this moment. But with your eyes closed and a deep breath and being as relaxed as you can, we're going to start with being aware of your feet, the way they're touching the ground, the way they feel in your shoes or your sandals or your socks. Moving up your body, to your legs, to your core, your belly, being mindful of the breath as we breathe in. And breathe out. And then as we get to our chest and our heart, we can imagine a ball of light just sitting there in our heart. This is the love and compassion, the loving kindness that we might have for ourselves. And as we sit there with that ball of light in our chest, I invite you to say to yourself, I'm worthy of love. I deserve love. I am worthy of grace. I deserve grace. I am worthy of love. I deserve love. I am worthy of grace. I deserve grace. And now as that ball of light is in you, I invite you to think of someone who you know casually, not too well, maybe a server at the restaurant you go to often, or that cashier at the grocery store that you go to all the time, somebody that's just a stranger to you, but a friendly stranger. I invite you to take that light and extend it from yourself to that stranger. Let it engulf them. And say to them, you are worthy of love. You deserve this love. You are worthy of love. You deserve this love. And then I invite you to think of someone who you just find particularly challenging in your life. Maybe it's a coworker you don't get along with, a neighbor whose dog always goes to the bathroom in your yard, somebody that you just irritates you. And I invite you to extend that light to them and let it engulf them and say to them, you are worthy of love. You deserve this love. You're worthy of grace. You deserve this grace. You are worthy of love. You deserve this love. You are worthy of grace. You deserve this grace. And finally, think of someone who you just passionately love. Your life would be completely lost without them. Extend that light to them and say to them, you are worthy of love. You deserve this love. You are worthy of grace. You deserve this grace. You are worthy of love. You deserve this love. You are worthy of grace. You deserve this grace. And now bring that light back to you. You are now in a circle of loving kindness and grace. Invite you to bring that love and grace back into your heart. I invite you to come back into this moment. Becoming aware again of your breath as we breathe in and as we breathe out. As we breathe in and as we breathe out. Going back through your legs to your feet. And I will end our time with this poem by David White, who, if you were at the ACPE conference a couple years ago, a guest speaker there, one of my favorite poems of him, Just Beyond Yourself. Just beyond yourself, it's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting and the rest restored by what you'll meet. The road is always beckoning. When you see the two sides of it closing together at that far horizon and deep in the foundations of your own heart at exactly the same time, that's how you know it's the road you have to follow. That's how you know it's where you have to go. That's how you know you have to go That's how you know. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. I think that was lovely. Thank you for helping us center ourselves as we prepare for this morning. I want to remind everybody, I'm Les Small-Stokes. I am co-convener for the ECCoP right now. And I want to remind everyone that we are recording this. So there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind because we are recording it. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should be able to see a microphone icon and a camera icon. If at any point you need to attend to something and we should not be able to see that, you might want to turn your camera off. Also, if while Imani is presenting, we have a lot of people on this call today. That's extremely exciting. To keep distractions to a minimum, please make sure that your microphone is muted. If you need help with that, we have 3 co-hosts, Stephanie Mattis-Hill and Clark Eccles, and myself will be monitoring the whole meeting. If you need help turning off your microphone, we will be able to do that for you. If you need any other assistance with anything happening during the meeting, please reach out to one of us. There's a chat box, a chat feature at the bottom, and you can private message any one of us, or Mark, or anybody that you see, you recognize, you want to be able to communicate with. You can communicate directly with them in that chat feature, and it won't go out to the rest of the group. We can help you directly. Let's see. Oh, also, because we have such a large crowd, when you have questions for Imani, we ask that you raise your hand. That's another feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That's on the far right. So the microphone and the camera icons are on the far left of your screen. You'll see a reactions icon at the far right of your screen, a little smiley face emoji. If you click on that, you'll see a hand that you can raise. That will let us know that we should tell Imani that you may have a question. We ask that you keep your questions, hold your questions until the question and response section of her presentation. In the middle of her presentation, she may have some times when she offers questions to the group for us to respond to. We ask that even at those times that you raise your hand and use that feature, just so that we can monitor the level of noise and understand what's happening in the meeting. I think those are all of the housekeeping details. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. We would love to help, and we're so happy you're here.
Thank you, Les. And for those who have joined since I made the last notice, at the very top of the chat box is a agenda or our schedule for the day. So if you're curious, kind of the timings, scroll up to the top of that chat box and you can see our schedule. Imani will be starting momentarily here. We'll go for about an hour, and then she'll take about 15 minutes of questions. We'll take about a 10-minute break. Imani will go for another hour. We'll have 15, 20 minutes of questions. Adjourn our time today. So our topic today grew out of Imani's workshop that she did at the ACPE conference this past spring, as she reviewed a variety of resources and theoretical positions from African-American voices that educators may or may not be aware of. And towards the end of that presentation, at least one that I attended, she talked about an expanded use of family systems theory with African-American students, families, clients, and stuff. So we felt that would be a rich piece for us to consider today. Many folks use family systems in their CPE or psychotherapeutic practices. And so invite Imani to kind of help us turn our eyes to the ways that this theory can be expanded from the way it's typically been laid out, whether it's been through Bowen, Friedman, Gilbert, or others who have worked with family systems theory. So we're really looking forward to Imani's presentation. Reverend Dr. Imani Jones is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and she's a graduate of The Ohio State University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in African American and African Studies and Political Science. Imani graduated from Princeton Theological Seminary with a Master of Divinity and Master of Theology degrees. And Imani has also earned a Doctor of Ministry from Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit, with a focus on African American voices and perspectives in CPE curriculum development. Currently, Imani is an ACPE certified educator and the CPE program manager at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center here in Columbus, Ohio. Imani is a board certified chaplain in the Association of Professional Chaplains, and she also serves as co-pastor along with her husband Colin of Advent United Church of Christ in Columbus. She's the proud mother of 3 children. So thank you, Imani, for your willingness to share with us today. Really looking forward to your presentation. Time is yours.
Wonderful. Well, good morning to all of you near and far. It is such a pleasure to be here with people, many of you in the village that has helped me to become a certified educator. It certainly does take a village, as you all know. And for those of you who I'm not familiar with, you're part of somebody's village. And so I'm grateful for your role in the lives of so many people who are doing this work, who are doing therapeutic work. It's truly an honor to be among friends. I have a lot of energy and joy and excitement about what we will be sharing and discussing and learning about together today. And there is a lot. So I want to make sure that we have adequate time, not only for you to receive the information that I have to share, but to offer your questions and comments and points of discussion. I'm going to share my screen if I've been given the power to do so. Looks like I have. So good to have that power. And I also just want to thank the planners and of this gathering for all your hard work. I know it takes a lot to do something like this. It's quite an undertaking. So I'm just appreciative of each of you and the work that you've done and the sacrifices that you've made to make this happen. Okay, so everyone knows why you've signed up and why you're here. I want to talk about, as Mark says, expanding the use of family systems theories, the supervision of African American students. And so everyone has signed up, so I'm sure you're aware of the objectives for the day. So I won't go through them one by one, but my hope is that when you leave the Zoom meeting today, that you'll have some contextually relevant perspectives and understandings about family systems theories from an African American perspective, and some practical application as well. So I'd like to begin by sharing a story. We love stories in our work. Several years ago, I was invited to participate in a CPE consultation committee to provide some insight around this particular student's readiness to move from level 1 to level 2 outcomes. And in preparing for this workshop, this is the memory that very vividly came to me, and I haven't been able to shake it. I was invited as a relatively new chaplain on the staff here at OSU. And it was my first time participating in a consultation that wasn't my own. And I was excited about it. And I also was aware that I was asked to participate because the student was an African-American female, and there was a desire for there to be some representation on the committee that would respect and be considerate of her ethnic background. So I was even more happy and excited to participate. And I can't remember who all was on the committee, and it really doesn't matter. I don't remember who else was in the room besides me and this young African-American student. And she shared her story and sought consultation. And at a certain point when she was talking about her family, she became really tearful. And she had grown up poor in some part of the Caribbean, and just, you know, had a simple life, had lots of extended family members and lots of connections that way. And I just remember she and I, only African-American people in the room, everyone else was white, and in everyone's best effort to try to give her consultation and help her, there seemed to be a disconnect around how she understood her life and her family and how others in the room understood it. And she seemed to, it was a lot of kind of criticizing her around her understanding of her sense of happiness and joy, that there must have been something wrong, that she couldn't grow up as poor as she did, with the complex family dynamics as she did, and still be joyous and happy. There must have been something that she wasn't quite understanding, something in her subconscious, something not quite accessible to her that she wasn't tapping into. And this was the kind of sentiment of everyone in the room. And I just remember sitting there thinking like, no, I know exactly what she's talking about. I know exactly what she's talking about in terms of her Black family and how they reckoned with their circumstances, but still had a level of joy. And she wasn't a mess. She wasn't, you know, it wasn't dysfunctional. There wasn't a sense of pathology, but she was happy with what she had, and that was enough. After the consultation was over, and I didn't say much in the consultation, but after it was over, I went to the restroom and I noticed that there was someone in the stall crying, and it was her. And I remember feeling so ashamed because I was asked to be there as another perspective. And I said nothing because there were all these white educators in the room who I thought surely they knew what they were talking about and they understood. And I just remember being in the restroom and she came out and I saw her crying and I just felt frozen and speechless and ashamed. And I remember her now, and I remember her as I'm sharing this presentation and as I've been preparing. And what came to mind to me as I thought of her is this quote by Nikki Giovanni, and it's from a poem that she has written entitled Nikki Rosa. So I'm going to invite us to take a listen to that at this time.
Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Nikki Giovanni.
Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're Black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no indoor toilet. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself and how good the water felt when you got your bath from one of those big tubs that folk in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. And even though you remember, your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together. And you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand Black love is Black wealth. And they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy.
Black love is Black wealth. As I think about the Black family, which no Black family is all the same, but this really sticks with me, even in the midst of so much complexity that we'll get into this morning. And so I just wanted to begin with that. And I'll ask this question: why is it important to expand traditional use and understanding of family systems theory? when we consider race and we consider racism as we work with African American families and students and clients. Family systems theories at their core focus on the processes that explain why families engage in patterns of interactions. And although family systems theory scholars acknowledge that family systems are influenced by social systems and social factors, there have been few attempts to specifically address how race, ethnicity, and racism affect the ways family and family systems theory can be used to help understand family dynamics and outcomes. A decontextualized family systems theory approach does not take into account the reality that race and racism often serve as a catalyst for culturally sanctioned parenting practice and parent-child interactions within African American families. The racial identity of families, or their level of racial consciousness of the family unit and of its members, drive the need to engage in practices to help African American children develop in a racialized society. Ignoring, minimizing, or turning a blind eye to racism or colorblind theology, embodying that may affect some African American families. And that would prevent scholars, educators, clinicians, practitioners from understanding the reasons that some African American families tend to be structured the way that they are, and the reasons they engage in certain patterns of behavior. Although family systems theory scholars acknowledge that family systems are influenced by societal level factors, there have been few efforts to specifically address how race, ethnicity, and racism affect the ways that family systems theory can be used to help understand these dynamics and outcomes in African American families. If family systems theories is to fully explain structure and process across all family ties, inclusive of racially, ethnic, and diverse families, it's critical to expand the ways in which we use these theories. This would allow for family systems theory to better capture the culturally relevant complexities and the existing strengths of African American families, often exhibited through their organizational structure and interactive processes. A foundational assumption for this presentation based on the literature reviewed is that the exploration of African American family, part of it is to recognize that Black families are systems, parent-child, parent-parent, partner-parent, etc., and also embedded in multiple other systems like community, for example, or political systems, and also even religious systems. And of course, absolutely, racial systems. Focusing on a systems perspective to explore and understand African American families emphasizes both process and structure in Black families. So I'd like to invite us on a journey very briefly through history by looking at the studies of the African American family through time. So we'll take a look at a few of these, of this timeline of the study of African American families through history. One of the very first studies was done by W.E.B. Du Bois, who really looked at the African American family in his book, The Negro Family in America. And he looked at how economic demands shaped intimate relations between African American males and females through their impact on marriage formation, skewed gender ratios, both relevant issues then and now. Du Bois observed that low wages and rising economic standards postponed marriage to an age dangerously late, and present economic demands drew the Negro woman to the city and kept men in the country, causing a dangerous disproportion of sexes. So that was where his emphasis was in the early 1900s. And then you've got E. Franklin Frazier, who was very interested in the Negro family. And he is by many considered to be the person who began a pejorative tradition of studying the African American family in general and low-income African American families in particular as deviant, pathological, and unstable. Unlike Du Bois, Franklin discounted the notion that African American culture influenced the development, organization, and functioning of Black families. And he maintained that the social terms of the social conditions in the US were the things that shaped them, and that alone. There were many people who were highly critical of his work, and many who agreed with his work. And then we moved to the 1950s and 60s, and the emphasis began to shift on the analysis of the African American family. And it didn't dismiss the influence of social context, but also gave attention to the notion that African American families as a significant force in the creation of social conditions and structure. Social and economic disadvantages were seen primarily as products of problematic organization and functioning in African American families across generations through socialization of values, personality, and social character deemed ill-suited for upward mobility. So the question became, were African American families a product of or the creator of the social systems that they were in? This was a debate then, and it's a debate now. It continues to go on with scholars and those who advocate for African American families being the product of social conditions. They tend to champion strategies that revolve around economic and social barriers. And those of the alternative view focus on changing the internal family dynamics, like child rearing, for example, or psychological functioning, as these factors are seen as an underlying economic and social disadvantage. So there was a lot of research done on that. There was Oscar Lewis's study on the culture of poverty. This notion was introduced then, and he identified a wide array of psychological orientations and behaviors that he believed characterized the poor and rendered poverty self-perpetuating. Things like lack of impulse control, present time orientation, minimal ability to defer gratification, and plans for the future. Echoing this perspective in many early studies of Black families that characterized them as disorganized, deprived, disadvantaged. You all may be familiar, I'm sure many of you are, with Patrick Moynihan's controversial The Negro Family, the Case for National Action in 1965, also known as the Moynihan Report. And this report tended to paint a dysfunctional view of the African American family. He says, at the heart of the deterioration of the fabric of the Negro society is the deterioration of the Negro family. It is the fundamental source of weakness of the Negro community. And he termed the Negro family a tangle of pathology. And one of his central areas of focus was the African American woman, who he viewed as perpetuating a matriarchal culture that in his mind was contributing to the demise of the African American family. And he drew upon many theorists, both Black and white during that time, even drawing upon E. Franklin Frazier, who I just discussed. So I have a little video I wanted us to take a look at for just a few moments, highlighting some of the perspectives of Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Each week, American History TV's Real America brings you archival films that help provide context for today's public affairs issues.
Our guest today on Meet the Press is the author of the controversial study, The Negro Family, Mr. Daniel P. Moynihan. His report, prepared when he was Assistant Secretary of Labor, at first was warmly praised, yet has recently been sharply criticized. Mr. Moynihan, a professor of political science, is now at Wesleyan University. He was one of the drafters of the nation's anti-poverty program, and he has just been appointed by Mayor-elect Lindsay to the New York City Poverty Task Force. Now we'll have the first questions from Mr. Moynihan from Lawrence E. Spivak, permanent member of the Meet the Press panel.
Here's a quotation, for example, from a recent article by William Ryan, a Harvard psychologist, who criticizes your report in The Nation. And this is what he writes, quote, "The implicit point is that Negroes tolerate promiscuity, illegitimacy, one-parent families, welfare dependency, and everything else that is supposed to follow." Now, that's the criticism he makes of your report. Now, how do you answer those charges?
I can't. I'm not responsible for the fact that he can't read. As E. Franklin Frazier said, and I quoted from him at some length, there is a lot of evidence that the Negro middle-class family, when it gets its opportunity, gets a bearing, is, if anything, more stern, more rigid than most. But the evidence is simply clear. Negro Americans live like any other Americans, and when they're forced into the ghetto and forced into disorganization, they have no more better protections than anyone else.
I'd like to ask you one specific question, which the New York Times quotes you today as saying. You say that 44% of the children in Harlem are illegitimate. Now, how do you know that?
Those are statistics of the New York City Department of Health, sir. 10 health districts in central Harlem, the area which the great American sociologist Kenneth Clark described in his HRU report as having undergone a massive deterioration of the fabric of society and its institutions, and right under our prosperous noses that happened. That hasn't existed for 50 years. That's happened in the last 15 years in this America, and we've been sitting around thinking things have been getting better, and they haven't been getting better for those children. And I think I for one, if you see what people can face for the civil rights movement in the way of sheriffs, in the way of howling mobs, in the way of the disapproval of their entire society, well, I think I would hope certainly I'm willing to face the disapproval of a few white liberals from Boston who think I shouldn't raise the subject because it's impolite.
Mr. Novak.
Mr. Moynihan, in your report you say, quote, equality of opportunity almost ensures inequality of results, unquote. Are you proposing preferential treatment on the hiring of Negroes?
I believe this country owes the American Negro his back wages, yes.
Should the federal government support preferential treatment for Negroes then?
I believe what President Johnson said in his Howard University speech. You cannot keep a man in chains for 3 centuries, then take the chains off and say suddenly, okay, you're free to run the race of life with anybody else. They have to be made, people have to be given the opportunity to compete with effective resources. And I believe that we should make a special effort.
So during this time in the 60s, there again was a lot of debate around, what is the cause of the African-American family decline? Who's responsible? What can we do? Social service programs were developed. Some people believe that those developments helped Black families, particularly around issues of economic distress and poverty, while others felt that those programs are precisely the kinds of things that have contributed to the decline of the African-American family. And this debate continues to go on today. In the 1970s, we began to see research around cultural deviant, cultural variant, and cultural equivalent perspectives in terms of African-Americans, viewing qualities of African-Americans that deviate from the European-American middle-class family as evidence of dysfunction in pathology. Those who are cultural variant perspectives view differences between Blacks and white families as outgrowths of their respective social cultural contexts, and the cultural equivalent perspective de-emphasized distinctive qualities of African-American families and highlighted qualities that were in common with European-American families. So again, just a new way to kind of look at this issue of the African-American family. When we move to, we also start to see African-centered and strengths-based models. So really looking at the African-American worldview, the African worldview, and how that influences African-American cultural identity around who they are from their African roots and heritage, as well as strengths-based models, which we'll talk about in the second half. In the 1980s, we began to see a review of African-American families within the context of environmental demands and circumstances. So you see a lot of some ecological models being developed, and we'll touch on that later on as well. And then in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of emphasis on racial socialization as an agent of identity formation, racial identity formation. We'll talk quite a bit about that this morning. And then from the 2000s on to current day, we've been seeing expanded use of family systems theories and models, in addition to building on the research that has been done previously, and even more expansion of racial socialization models. So that's just a brief review of the history. In order to really understand how we can have a systems view of the African-American family, I think it's important to take a moment to examine the African-American family structure. So we'll do some of that. Now, in traditional family systems theories, kind of Western model, you see marital subsystems, parental subsystems, and sibling subsystems. And African-American families certainly have all of those as well. There are other systems to consider, even within the parental system, the single parent, co-parent, and step-parent subsystems, and other groups have those as well, but really looking at the implications of race, discrimination, socioeconomic factors on each of these designations. I think that's the expansion of how we understand some of these theories is essentially what's race got to do with it, right? So there are those subsystems, but then there's the kinship subsystem and the extended family subsystem. So there's certainly lots of ways to really look at and examine and try to understand Black families, how they function based on how they're structured.
Some of the exhibits at Chicago's The DeSable Museum of African American History offer a jolting, haunting window to the horrors of the past and the history of slavery in the US. Although currently closed to the public due to COVID-19, the museum is hosting a series of online discussions during Black History Month in February.
It's so important to understand that the Black American story is the American story, right? And it's like a thread and a cloth that you can't unweave, because in order to understand one, you have to also understand and have knowledge of the other.
This year, the theme of Black History Month is family, examining representation, identity, and diversity. Irma says telling Black stories must begin with a focus on the diaspora of Africans during slavery and the move to separate families.
The American slavers insidiously said, if we want to break these people's spirits entirely and make them completely subservient as our property, we have to take away that family structure. We have to take away that name. We have to take away the connections of tribes and families and regions and scatter to different parts of the colonies.
Kim Delaney is the Director of Education at the museum. She says despite various policies over the years aimed at separating Black families, the notion of family remains at its core.
From an African-centered perspective, the family is of the utmost importance. Family is the nucleus for all else that matters. The Black family has been under assault since before 1619 a little bit, but definitely since chattel slavery. American chattel slavery. Even the policies that are in place now still work to separate the Black family.
Black.
It just can't be overstated. And the history is so important. To understand why family is so important for African Americans, whether they are healthy and fully functioning or not, just the reality that there was such a concerted effort to disrupt and destroy and separate Black families. And even though I was not around at that time, it's something that's in my bones and in the bones of African Americans around how we regard family, how we understand family, how we engage family, even as we struggle with family. And so much of what I have to share with you today, it's going to connect back to that experience of slavery and everything that happens after that, because the African-American family operates and exists within that context and all of the perpetual effects of that context that we live in even today. So I want to say a little bit about the subsystem of African-American married couples, actually, and how looking at marriage in the Black context from a systems approach can really help to illuminate some things around how race impacts African-American couples. So the stressful experiences in one sphere of life, often associated with breakdowns in other spheres of life. This is known as stress spillover. Families of color have external experiences that spill over into their family life. So specifically for African-American couples, their personal histories of discrimination are linked to lower marital satisfaction, according to several studies. A study by Murray and others found that increased incidences of discrimination were linked to higher levels of psychological distress for African-American women, which then resulted in poor quality of intimate relations with their spouses. Another study by Lincoln and Che was done in 2010 found that personal histories of discrimination had negative spillover effects on the psychosocial health and marital satisfaction for both members in the relationship. These personal discriminatory practices and experiences produce stressors that may exceed the coping strains in that marital relationship. Most couples, obviously, experience tensions and strains in their intimate relationships. However, discriminatory race-based experiences for African-American couples become a key compounding effect by adding to the already distressing experiences that commonly occur in a marriage or an intimate relationship. So in addition, racism can have a debilitating effect on relationships, particularly when there's a lack of ethnic pride, or if there's internalized racism, or simply a lack of tools to buffer the negative effects of racism. So considering that marital satisfaction can be a protective factor against discriminatory practices and experiences, how partners interact with each other as a result of race-based experiences can either be a protective or a debilitating factor that contributes to processes that may strengthen or weaken the foundation of that relationship. In terms of single parent families, there are, of course, functional and dysfunctional, like any other ethnic background or group as it relates to family. But it's important to know when we're dealing with Black single parent families, to keep a clear perspective on what constitutes a well-functioning family. It's important because so much of the literature about single family, African-American single families, have been derogatory. And things that were mentioned in Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report, to use him as an example. We have to be cautious about the tendency to see families whose structures may be very different from our own as deviant. Single parenthood doesn't necessarily make a family system dysfunctional. There are many Black parents who are unmarried and they function and dwell as parents, or they co-parent. Their children grow to be capable adults. Many divorced or separated Black parents function well, but there are, as Nancy Boyd Franklin points out, some distinctions of single parent families as functional and dysfunctional, with the designations of underorganized family, where the children seem to be out of control, mother maybe appears to be overwhelmed. There might be an over-centralized mother having power over concentrated in one person, that mother who's usually very overwhelmed and overburdened. She's like the switchboard of the family, and all the communication and everything goes through her, which can be a challenge. And then there might be a family where there's a dysfunctional parent. The children might be running the family. You usually may have an overburdened and highly functional parental child. And that family, another designation is maybe there's a family who has a boyfriend as a hidden member. So in a therapeutic context, the mother might initially be present, may come to therapy with the children, but it may be sessions later before the therapist may find out that there's a boyfriend. Maybe there's no mention of the boyfriend. Maybe his presence is minimized or denied. His involvement is unclear. So there are, again, many ways to consider what the single parent family context for African Americans looks like. Is different for different people. The extended family network has a significant place in these families. Lots of supports are helpful for single parents. And sometimes the presenting problem in therapy may be a symptom of problems that are really emerging from the more complex extended family subsystem. So kind of being aware of that there are multiple layers and players involved, and you may not get to that right away. There are also, in the African-American family, extended family subsystems. So there are, in an African-American context, while you have mother, father, sister, brother, maybe your mother, brothers, mothers, sisters, siblings, or, but you also, it doesn't just stop there. So often in more traditional family systems theory context, there's a focus on that nuclear family, which doesn't capture how the extended family system works in the African American community, where there are so many ways to do family and so many people are involved in the family. So here you have an example of a variety of different extensions of an extended family. You've got subfamilies where you may have two people who are related and they have no children in the home, but there's a relative living with them. You might have extended family who are have relatives as secondary members. So this might be, your niece, your nephew, your cousin living with you, or they might be a cousin of the parents in the home, elders as well, or the parents of the primary family. You might have augmented families. African-American children are raised in a home and they're not related to the heads of the household. They might be, you're taking someone else in to help out, or you just might have non-blood relatives altogether. It might be a friend, it may be a play cousin, it may be a play auntie. There are lots of fictive kin in the African-American context who have just as powerful of an impact on the shaping force of an individual as would a nuclear family. And so making room in family systems theory to include all of these different iterations of the family system is important. I don't know how many play aunties and play cousins I had growing up who are very significant in my life. It was just all that I knew, and it was family. It was family to me. So that's something that's really, really important to consider. I also just wanted to talk for a moment about informal adoption, kinship care, and elder care. And again, just even expanding this understanding of family even more in the African-American context. So informal adoption is the informal social service network of African-Americans since the days of slavery, where you took people in, you took in children. So imagine, slaves, the father and mother are sold, the children are left there on the plantation. Someone's going to take care of them. So typically, the elders and others on the plantation would take care of those children, and those children will become their own. And that still happens today as well. And I wanted to just share, as I was preparing this presentation and really thinking deeply about this, it didn't occur to me at all, but I was informally adopted in my family. I was a teenage mother, had a child when I was 16 years old, and things weren't really going very well at home for a long time, even before my son was born. But when I got to the 12th grade, trying to graduate from high school, and things were so tenuous at home, I thought, I got to figure out a way to change my situation. And I moved in with Uncle George here, top right, because there was a school around the corner from his house that had a daycare. So I could take my son to the daycare, I could go to class, and I could, take the stroller and go home after school. But he informally adopted me. I asked him, can I stay with you? I really need to get out of my house where I'm living, and circumstances aren't great. And he took me in. His brother was living there at the time because he had been ill, and so was his adult daughter at the time. So we were all, in his home, kind of adopted by him. And it's because of him. Some people may look at the Black family structure and, you got this kid living with this mom, this relative, and, why aren't parents raising their children? Why are they so scattered? And I tell you what, if it had not been for Uncle George, I don't know if I would have been able to successfully graduate. Number 6 in my class, I might add, because I had somewhere to go where I could be safe, where I could focus on my studies and raise my child through this informal adoption process. So while some might consider it, a deficit, in my case, it was a strength, and it has been a strength for African Americans and other ethnic minorities throughout history to be able to pursue opportunities that otherwise they may not be able to pursue because of their family circumstances. There's also kinship care, which is a continuation of formal adoption in the African American family. And it's the out-of-home placement, which falls under foster care regulations. And before the 1980s, nearly all African American children who were reared by kin were outside of the child welfare system. So then you had that informal adoption. But after 1986, due to the crack cocaine epidemic, the spread of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in inner cities, the number of children who were placed with in foster care soared. And again, if you think about slavery, the last thing that African American families want to do, contrary to how it may seem to some, is to be separated from their kids and to be separated from their family. It is a sort of like, I don't know, again, it's like this deep in your bones kind of a feeling. That's like the last thing you want to do. So family members are going to come together in a lot of cases and try to do what they can to keep the kids together, to keep the family together. And this is why you see a lot of grandparents due to lots of issues. It could be health, it could be economic, it could be mass incarceration, but lots of grandparents taking care of grandchildren in a kinship care context. It's been a strength for the African American family throughout history. It preserves cultural identity, traditions, and allows children to continue to feel connected, a sense of belonging to not only their families, but also to the community and the culture. In its most basic form, kinship care allows for families to continue to care for and advocate and support their children rather than them going into the system. So that's a big thing in the African American community, to kind of try to keep people from going into the system. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is elder care. This is a longstanding practice of African American family members caring for the elderly in the family. And that's really important because the tradition of caring for elderly family members is longstanding. It's born out of certain harsh realities, right? Historic lack of access to resources like good health care, public support, or the kind of jobs that would guarantee security in old age. This tradition isn't unique to African Americans. Obviously, studies show that nearly 1 in 4 American families is taking care of an elderly relative or friend. Still, older Blacks are twice as likely to receive care from family members when their health declines, according to a recent study by the National Institute on Aging. And while caring for one's family is a source of pride, love, and obligation, it also comes with stress. Lost wages, jobs, lost educational opportunities. Maybe you have to pass up an opportunity because you need to care for someone. So given the economic stress on Black families and their increased mobility, some experts worry that the coming generations will not be able to fulfill this caregiving role. There's this gap between the cultural value of elder care and the practical realities. There's a tension here that gives this cultural practice and often expectation that the elders in the family who are respected and revered in the African American context, that they're going to be cared for, that maybe we're not going to be able to meet that expectation. It was very common for me growing up to go to a relative's house and there's a hospital bed in the living room, or some other room has been converted because financially, maybe one couldn't afford a nursing home. But then also, it just doesn't, for many families, not just Black families, it doesn't feel like it's the thing to do, the right thing to do. So I just asked you to think about this. Have you had CPE students or clients in therapy who were faced with this dilemma? Perhaps they were struggling to finish CPE. Maybe they had to quit. Maybe they were turning in assignments late because of elder care issues. And maybe the first thought is, well, they're over-functioning, they're poorly differentiated, they have poor boundaries, they need to do what they need to do for themselves to be autonomous. I mean, I would say maybe yes, and what about the sociocultural context and the historical background, the economic realities of the situation? How do these things fit in your work with them and trying to understand their situation? Is there consideration? So all these complex factors that are layered on top of each other around whether or not they can stay in the program or do well in the program, or how they present in the therapeutic context. So just something to be aware of and keep in mind. Okay, grandparents. Grandparents in the African American family function as a family resource through their generational connectedness. They bridge the past, the present, and the future. You know, I thought about when I heard that Marianne Obama was going to the White House when Barack Obama was elected as president. It made perfect sense to me. I'm like, yep, that's exactly what every Black person I ever met would do if it were them. And they had a good relationship with their grandma, and it just made sense. It's that grounding force that grandparents have in the African American community. I remember hearing that she, you know, had those girls making up the bed and doing their laundry in the White House, because there's something that grandparents, particularly African American grandparents and families, teach their children. And we'll talk about this later on, about hard work and doing for oneself and things like that. But it made perfect sense to me that she would live in the White House with them, just given what I understand about grandparents in the African American family. They're the essence of family bonds, and they can be a constant object in the life of grandchildren. They teach basic skills. They're often the negotiators between parent and children. Same gender grandparents, they are role models for adulthood. So granddaughters may model themselves after their grandmothers, and grandsons may model themselves after their grandfathers. As I mentioned, they connect the past and the present as well as the future. They give a sense of historical rootedness. They determine how young and view the old in society. And they're also great parents, and they provide, in the sense that they're like a second parent, if you will, that they are next in emotional power only to the parents, you know, in the lives of children. So grandparents have a very prominent role in the African American family. They serve as historians, mentors, role models, wizards. People sometimes are enamored and in awe by their grandparents. And so one of the things I thought about is, you know, I think about the multi-generational transmission process of family systems theory. And researchers have really looked at, in terms of Black families, how what the transgenerational linkages between grandparents and grandchildren are. And studies have shown that various proverbs and sayings and words of wisdom have been passed down from grandparents to their grandchildren. And these things pass through generations. And so as we think about the things that are passed down, we do genograms, and we look at the family projection process, and we look at what's been passed down from one generation to the next. One way to also understand how African American families function is in really looking at the things that pass down via race and cultural identity, the wisdom that's passed down from generation to generation, because that's a part of the identity, and that's a part of the functioning of African American families. And I've seen that certainly in my own life, in the lives of my African American students as well. Once I learned the connection to their grandparents and maybe certain ways of being that they have. Like I have a student, had an African American male student whose grandfather was in the military, and so was he. And his grandfather had a strong work ethic, and so did he. His grandfather was pretty stern and strict, and so is he. Learned behaviors. And also the values that his grandfather taught him about hard work, about being a Black man in America, and how nobody's going to give you anything. I mean, these kinds of things are passed down. And so we can kind of look at how our students and clients behave and how that connects to some of the values that have been transmitted through generations by their grandparents. So now, before we break, I want to transition to racial socialization. And I probably won't get through all of this before the break, but that's okay. But we'll get started with racial socialization. Much of the research of African Americans focuses on self-concept and racial identity, but often ignores parental racial socialization in societal and historical traditions that stress racial membership as a determinant of group and individual identity. It's paramount. It's paramount to examine racial identity and racial socialization within a larger framework if we're going to understand how African Americans come to view themselves and the world in which they live. The African-American family is both directly and indirectly impacted by the negative conceptions and treatments of African-Americans in this country. Messages are received through the media, through political, economic, and educational systems, the church, other institutions of American society. And so the African-American family at least serves at least two important functions in early child development. It fosters the development of a personal frame of reference for self-identity, self-worth, achievement, group identity, and other behaviors in society. And it provides comfort and affection, which lessens the negative and often deleterious consequences of racism. While there's some models that focus on racial identity development, such as an aggressance model developed by William Cross, and Afrocentric worldview models, and there are many Afrocentric scholars who have formed many of those, I want to really look at racial socialization because it is a tool that the family uses to teach about identity development. So there are two key questions that sort of in the background of parents' minds as we think about racial socialization. How do African-American parents shape their children's learning about race and ethnicity? And how do they shape their children's learning about race and ethnicity? Kind of the same question. However, within the context of racism and discrimination, within that context. In African-American culture, socialization is influenced by the cultural context. There's no socialization, no identity formation without it. And that's not commensurate with the social dictates of mainstream American life. For families of color, a significant aspect of the socialization process is preparing children to recognize their position within the larger society structure. Beginning in the 1980s, there was an increased interest in how African-American parents shape their understanding of their position in the environment traditionally and their group identity. So they asked these questions. And evidence began to emerge regarding how African-American families attempt to prepare, attempt to buffer and insulate their children and foster positive functional group identity. And so here's a definition of racial socialization: a variety of explicit and implicit messages transmitted to minority children about the meaning and significance of their racial or ethnic group identity, racial stratification, and inter and intragroup relations. So there's been tons of research beginning in the early 1980s with researchers developing specific typographies that represent the various racial socialization messages given by African-American parents by their children. And the task of African-American parents, you know, all parents want to provide for their children, right? They want to raise their children. But not only are these things performed for African-Americans within the mundane, extreme environmental stress of racism, but they also include the responsibility of raising physically and emotionally healthy children who are Black in a society in which being Black has negative connotations. So socializing children to live in a racist society is perhaps the most important aspect of parenting children of color. So this is, again, why I'm looking at this racial socialization. So again, lots of typographies were developed, and I'm not going to go through all of them. There are many. There is one, though, that really captures kind of all of the typologies, if you will. This one here, the triple quandary, it was one of the first ones, and it does capture much of them. But what I'm going to focus on in my next slide are these four racial socialization themes. Cultural socialization, which is the transmission of information that reinforces racial and cultural pride and knowledge through positive representations of African-American culture. Teaching about culture, teaching about your heritage, history, customs, where you come from, super important stuff. Racial cultural socialization is a huge part of helping young African-American children understand who they are, take pride in who they are as Black people. And so these photos here, it's a Because of Them We Can campaign. It was started in 2013 by Unique Jones Gibson. And for 28 days during the month of February, she photographed children dressed as iconic figures in Black history, both historical and contemporary, to teach them the way a way to connect Black history with the current state and connecting the dots between the past, the present, and the future. This cultural pride also comes through music, and there's so many ways that African-American people, I don't know, I'm sure maybe it's the case with other groups, but African-American people have really been intentional about making sure that young people in particular, but all Black people have pride in who they are, know who they are. So in the 70s, when James Brown says, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," that's cultural socialization. That is helping African-American people, young people, older people to be proud of who they are in a world that says that they're ugly, that they're lazy, that they're not intelligent, that they aren't worthy. So the music, there's songs in every generation that speak to this. Aretha Franklin, Young, Gifted, and Black. Denise Williams, Black Butterfly. And so as we prepare to take a break for questions, I'm gonna play a song for you. And I wanna invite you to move at your seat or wherever you are, but just really listen to what what is being said, and also see if you can kind of connect with the emotion and the feeling of these Black people who are singing and dancing around a Black pride. And then we'll stop for questions.
I don't sing, but it's one of those sing songs. Black is beautiful. It feels good to be Black. I'm Black and proud.
Give me 5 on the Black hand side. Yeah, on the Black hand side. Give me 5 on the Black hand side. Yeah, that's the new dap. So tell the news that we're more than just thugs, athletes, and hood rats. We're the most innovative, underrated, complicated culture in the whole wide world. Our story proves that. We weren't just slaves, we were more than that. When Europeans weren't caves, we were more than that. Bro, we taught them how to bathe, even more than bath. Look at all the stuff we gave, the morals is back. I'm talking morals like the Black kings that ruled the first place where, hold on, man, hella, that's word to Othello. More with the ooh in the center. If you ever feeling lost, just remember, you is the winner. You Black. Be proud of that, you Black. Be proud of that, you Black. Be proud of that. Proud of Black, baby, proud of Black. I'm Black. And I'm proud of that, I'm Black. I'm proud of that, I'm Black. I'm proud of that. Proud of Black. Proud of Black. I'm a rose that grew out of concrete, and so are you. Together we blossom into a bouquet. Our aura and aroma noticed in any room full of lilies. You can smell a rose, perfume with shea butter and coconut oil and black soap. A melanin popping. Since that day we sprouted from that soil in that continent, where you find gold, oils, diamonds, rubies redder than robin. How you wider than teeth, baby? No wonder we blossom. I find it ironic the concrete that was holding us back was never black, 'cause Black don't crack. No, Black don't crack. Baby, Black is like coal under pressure. It evolves into diamonds that glow, shining bright like gold. Man, our story is amazing. Greatest never told. What culture you know can overcome the same fate. Black ain't bad, baby. Black is straight. You Black. Be proud of that. You Black. Be proud of that. You Black. Be proud of that. Proud of Black, baby. Proud of Black. I'm Black. And I'm proud of that. I'm Black. I'm proud of that. I'm Black. I'm proud of that. Proud of Black. Proud of Black. Look at all the stuff we've been through. Jet magazine, yeah, we had a bunch of issues. Missed opportunities, we had a couple miscues. Still we made it, we paid it when the rent's due. Even through oppression, we started with kings, forcing the slaves, transition to leaders, inventors, and rulers of states. We moved and we shaped the fabric of the country that swooped us away. Don't you ever think you weak, that we were just slaves? 'Cause I'm a griot with a bachelor's and a master's. I went to college, learned why we had to call them masters. They wouldn't let us read our knowledge, that would be disastrous. 'Cause when you free your mind, you want to break out them shackles. See, they just want to move your body. I'm trying to move your mind. They just want to move your body. I'm trying to move your mind. They just want to loose it up. I'm trying to stiffen spines, make you stand up and raise your fist with some pride. 'Cause you Black. Be proud of that. You Black. Be proud of that. You Black. Be proud of that. Proud of Black, baby. Proud of Black. I'm Black. And I'm proud of that. I'm Black. I'm proud of that. I'm Black. I'm proud of that. Proud of Black. Proud of Black. I'm Black. Be proud of that. You Black. Be proud of that, you black. I'm black. Be proud of that. Proud and black, baby, proud and black. I'm black. I'm black. And I'm proud of that. I'm black. I'm black. I'm proud of that. I'm black. I'm black. I'm proud of that. Proud and black. Proud and black. I'm black.
All right. I hope people got some good movement right there. Yeah. So let's see if you all have any questions or comments. And when we go into the second half, we'll talk a bit more about the racial socialization piece and the impact of it, as well as move into some more family systems theory concepts and how these racial socialization and these things can apply in your clinical work and supervision with students.
And again, we want to ask folks to use the raise hand feature under the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen of any questions you have for Imani, and then Stephanie will call on those folks. So,
and questions and comments. If you just have a comment to share, that's fine too. Thanks for the encouragement. I can't see anybody's faces, so I don't know if y'all are like, this is good. I don't know if I like it. So thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have Jeffrey White.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, I was just curious, and this may be addressed later on in the presentation. So comment, first off, like amazing. I'm so happy to hear that this is happening, especially like putting it in the context with Nationwide Children's and the kids that we're serving there. I'm curious, and like I said, if we're gonna talk about it later, you can just be like,
Sure.
oh, we're gonna talk about it later. We ain't gonna talk about that right now. But how can we apply what we've been talking about in terms of experiences of Black joy and Black love being Black wealth, and almost a recontextualization away from monetary success being a benchmark for happiness and joy? How can we put that in conversation with the multiplicity of Black experiences? So like there are some Black people that are wealthy, but they have, you know, family members who are impoverished. And so how those things interconnect, and there's still a mentality of poverty, but that joy still comes because of that mentality, even though there is a monetary wealth attached to that. How is there going to be any conversation about intermingling the two and understanding that duality? And again, the multiplicity of Black experiences.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for your question. I will talk about that in the context, though, of some of the dilemmas that can create sometimes for people in a family where you have some who are doing well and some who aren't, in the context of family systems theory. But I mean, I do think that, you know, Black joy is present in a variety of different contexts. And I think so often it's the case in mainstream American society that it's hard to conceptualize joy of any kind while having lack. And it sort of seems like, you know, joy and contentment is equated with success and with prosperity, the achievement of educational goals and things like that. And I think that African Americans and other communities of color have had to, by virtue of some of these dynamics and out of necessity, have found joy in a variety of different contexts that are intrinsic to their community. So like their faith tradition, for example, and the joy, whether you're rich or poor, whether you have something or not, but that faith community, that kind of deep intrinsic sense of a higher purpose and a divine being that's been with your ancestors and is with you if you subscribe to that kind of faith tradition or belief. Like those are things that people tap into regardless of their socioeconomic status. Community is another thing that's important, that whether you live in the hood or whether you live in Beverly Hills, community has always been something that's important to everybody, certainly, but to African American people. If you go back again to slavery and Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, people doing things together, whether they're actively or passively resisting together, protesting together, eating pork and beans together, whatever it is, that they're together. And I think Bell Hooks was talking about that too, that there's this togetherness, even in, you know, trying circumstances that gives people joy. I was talking to my husband last night about this was watching that Bell Hooks poem, and we were talking just about how even the togetherness, that even though her father was an alcoholic, that there was joy in being together, that didn't matter. And so, yeah, we were just talking about, we just want to be together, and we'll make do and find those moments of joy. And sometimes it's in something very mundane, and sometimes it's in something very profound. So, I mean, as I'm just sort of thinking about what you're saying, my experience of the African-American community is that those moments of joy are found in so many different spaces and places.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Okay, we have Chaplain Anita.
Hi, Chaplain Anita. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm so excited I forgot to unmute. I just want to say
right.
this is fabulous. I'm enjoying everything you're sharing. But as this is more of a just a reiteration. I think it kind of ties into also what Jeffrey's saying. But when Nikki Giovanni was sharing the poem about Black wealth, it made me reflect on my freshman year of college. And when I went away to school, that's literally when I found out I was poor.
Right.
I didn't know I was poor before then, because based upon what you're sharing, the way how your presentation started about the family, that was my family. That's what I knew, and it was beautiful. But then when I left my family and my community in another space, and it was at HBCU, but to see people with more and living at what we would call at a higher levels of success and what would be more traditional family units, then all of a sudden it made me look at my family a little bit differently. So it was like, in a sense, I wish I would have never found out I was poor. But I just want to reiterate, when we're dealing with others in relationships, that we necessarily can't relate to their family or their family units. That doesn't mean it's not beautiful, as long as it's healthy. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Chaplain Anita. Every Black person I know has said something like that, like who grew up poor. We didn't know we were poor. My husband, we joke when our first year of marriage, we were married, we had 2 children, and we made $10,000 for the year. And he said, oh my gosh, we did well. I said, honey, we are below the poverty line. Where are you getting that from? But just no awareness, because we were happy. We didn't have a whole lot in that little apartment down the street from Morehouse College, but we were just happy to be together. And we made it work. We make a little bit more than that now, but it's those fundamental times when we were able to establish ourselves as a family that grounds us today. So I've heard so many Black people say what you said. I concur, absolutely. Thank you.
Trina.
Hi, Trina.
Hey, Dr. Imani, I just want to say the ancestors are hollering hallelujah for you today. And I just thank you for showing up and having the courage to tell our story and to bring it into the room. I just thank you so much. I love you, you know I do. And I just say hallelujah, amen, ashe. Yes, sister, keep going, and I'm coming with you. So thank you for this day.
Thank you, Dr. Trina.
Reverend Mary Madison.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just, it's not amazing, because it was just a part of the culture that African Americans have been self-medicating and self-caring throughout generation. And even in a hostile environment, the positive language about who you are sustained you to go out into a community that said you weren't that much. And we actually believed it in spite of what we could see. And so that's more of a statement, but I'm thinking, does the language we use today impact negatively on our students? For instance, prison to school to prison, and disadvantage, and all the negative terms we use. It's trying to help, but it's not framed in a way that says you can. You have to first prove you can.
I think that's a good point. And I was thinking this morning, like, oh my gosh, there's this could be a class. I mean, there's just so much to say, but I was thinking about language a bit, and I was thinking particularly, I won't talk about African-American fathers as much. And I wanted to, and I like to. I found a really good piece on language and fatherhood in hip hop and family systems theory, and how, hip hop artists repurpose and redefine and use language to describe their situation, giving themselves agency, to use the words that they use to describe themselves as fathers in their situation. And so what African-American people do and have done with language is nothing short of amazing. And so, I think we're always reinventing language and coming up with ways to express and describe who we are from our unique experience outside of the mainstream popular culture and it's acceptable, socially acceptable language. And so I think always, language is important, whether we're talking about kids in school or whether we're talking about clinical pastoral education or therapy. What are the words and phraseology that we use to connect with people, or are those terms disconnecting? Are those terms perpetuating racist ideology and oppression? So I think it's very important for us to think about language as we're doing this kind of work, and maybe even reimagining some of the words that we use and some of the language that we employ when we're working with people who are different from us, and then allow those individuals to speak in their language, and for us to be okay with embracing the language that they approach us with, if that's authentic to who they are. And maybe if we don't understand the language, practicing cultural humility to then say, tell me more about that. Right? I'm curious about that word. I haven't heard that before. What does that mean? And how life-giving that is to someone, particularly who has been oppressed and told that their voice and their language is second class and second rate. Thank you.
Marlon Carter.
Hey, how you doing?
Good morning.
Hey, how you doing today? How's everyone doing? I'm really enjoying this, and I appreciate the rap video we just saw. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm that MTV generation. I remember when MTV first started showing rap videos and everything. So I love music, and I love rap music. And one of the things I was thinking about, you were speaking of cultural socialization. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, James Brown. And there's a lot of cultural socialization in hip hop, but then there's this other side to it of hip hop that I think that is destructive. And I've been criticized for kind of saying that, because I was told that, well, that's their story. And I understand that it's their story, but it is about how you present that story and what you are glamorizing. For instance, there is a rap group out of Houston, Texas, UGK. And one of the members said, Pimp C, which is a debatable name, he said that, we used to rap about, he's deceased now, but we used to rap about selling the drugs. Now we telling the other side of it, when you get caught by the police, or, what it does to the community and everything like that. But I just want to say to you, I appreciate that video and the cultural socialization of it. And it makes me just continue to think about the other side of the damage that it does. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that. I struggle with the same tension. I was a big UGK fan back in the day too. RIP, Pimp C, absolutely, Chad. But yeah, it's a struggle. It is a struggle. The self-expression and the telling of the story, and like I struggle with the misogyny in hip hop and the way in which women are portrayed. I mean, that's something that I struggle with. So yeah, I think it's important for cultural critics to look at all of these things and to weigh in to provide a holistic picture of some of the things that we do. Just because it's Black and just because it sounds good doesn't mean that it's productive and it's helpful. And at the same time, there is a story to be told. And so yeah, I can appreciate the tension, and thank you so much for your comment.
Residents and fellows at Cleveland VA.
Hi, residents and fellows.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm one of the residents here, first year residents. And first I want to say thank you for your presentation. And I want to say I was very touched by your introduction story with the young lady who was crying in the bathroom. And it seems to me that in the CPE world, childhood hardship oftentimes is equal to childhood trauma. And when someone explains their childhood hardship in the context of a happy childhood, the CPE world oftentimes thinks that the person has lack of self-awareness. And so it seems as if that's what was happening to that young lady. She was explaining her childhood, her hardship in a way that was a happy childhood, and that wasn't being accepted. Could you explain more about that? Could you explain why that happens? Why someone that goes through a happy childhood, why experiencing hardship, is that their narrative is oftentimes not accepted within the CPE world?
Well, I mean, I think thank you for your question. I think it's precisely one of the reasons why we're here today. It's just I think that folks are well-intentioned, and everybody who does this work who really wants to work with students and help them to become more self-aware and, all of those things. And yet at the same time, if someone enters into that supervisory encounter and interaction, and they look at it from their worldview and their lens and don't have an awareness of what it's like to be impoverished and to also be very grateful and very happy for what you had, or if they've never been to South Africa, where people in certain places live in abject poverty and yet the most grateful, joyous, happy people you'd ever meet. So if one is approaching, and I'll talk about this at the end about some practical applications, but if one's approaching that encounter from a Eurocentric Western worldview, then it's not very likely that that individual, without the cultural humility and openness to consider another possibility, would see, that there is another way to experience a traumatic experience as a child and not be completely traumatized by it and everything else. Like there are ways, there's no way that I would say African Americans have been able to survive chattel slavery and Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow without tapping into something, right, that can keep us going. Because, if you just lay all the facts on the table, what point and what reason do we have? So I just think that, intersectionality, definitely important to think about that as well. So that's one of the reasons why we're here today and why we're going to continue to do this kind of work and have these kind of dialogues to help to widen the perspective and broaden the understanding of the multiplicity of experiences that people can have that are different from the mainstream predictable nuclear family kind of experience that is not even really, the majority of people's experiences anymore nowadays anyway. We're holding on to an ideal that isn't really quite the reality.
Okay, and then Kate Anderson will be our last question before we have a 10-minute break.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Imani. I think you might touch on this later, and if so, then just we'll move on to the break. I teach in a community-based program where we have community clergy and we have chaplains and folks of all different bents and ilks. And so it can be pretty diverse at times. Do you have suggestions on how to facilitate informing the empathetic awareness of the folks who look like me in the group without putting undue stress and strain on the folks who are African American or of different origin? Is there a way to approach that so that folks don't feel a burden?
That's a good question. That's a question that comes up all the time in cross-cultural, racial kind of conversations. On the one hand, you don't want the minority to feel like they're responsible for educating and they have to carry the load, or when we talk about these kinds of things, it can be re-traumatizing. And then on the other hand, for the white folks in the room, that there's, their feelings and kind of how they're wrestling with it. And I mean, I just think personally, having participated in these kinds of groups is just saying that out the chute, like, look, we're gonna have this conversation. And, it may cause you to feel uncomfortable. And Black people, if at any point you feel like, suddenly you're the token Black person or responsible, just being able to create an environment. So, I don't know how the trust has been fostered up to this point, but getting to a place where that trust is fostered, where people are open, where they sort of have been seeing each other to some capacity, and that, takes some time to build that. But at that point, being able to facilitate those kinds of conversations and just lay it all out there to say, hey, this is how you may feel, and encourage people to own and give voice to their feelings of discomfort, or to say, what, I am not the spokesperson for all, minorities, or, just to really encourage. And that CPE way of authenticity, vulnerability, and sharing. But again, it's if the group is ready, if they have reached that point where that kind of a conversation will be fruitful and not counterproductive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
All right, we're going to take a brief break here. Monty, thanks for a rich presentation this morning. We're looking forward to more of that. Why don't we reconvene here in about 9 minutes at 10:45, and then we will go from there. So we will see you folks back here in just a few minutes. It is 10:45. Everyone's been able to do a little bit of a leg stretch and bio break here. Monty, we're ready for the second half of your presentation. Take it away.
Okay, let me share this correctly. There we go. Okay, we were talking about racial socialization. So we've gotten through the cultural socialization. So next, let's talk about preparation for bias. So this tenet of racial socialization is characterized by parents transmitting messages that prepare their children for their minority status in society. So such messages communicate an understanding of societal perceptions of African Americans. So for example, parents of African American males may prepare them for policing and racial profiling through a process by which they equip them with knowledge of how to ensure that they are not perceived as hostile. This is the talk, right? This preparation is done to protect youth from oppressive societal consequences, such as being detained by law enforcement or worse. It's really a matter of life and death for African American people. So that's the preparation for bias, preparing them for what they know based on their experience is at some point going to happen out there in this world, and in this country in particular. Promotion of mistrust. Now, I recognize that maybe this sounds very, very bad to promote mistrust, but this is the tenet described as messages that encourage African American youth to be cautious in white contexts and in interactions with white people. It's a socialization method through which families emphasize the need to be wary and to be distrustful in interracial interactions. This strategy is primarily used by parents who have experienced adverse interracial interactions themselves, which then they try to prevent their children from experiencing. An example of this would be found in the children's book, Ruth and the Green Book, which details Ruth's African-American family's travels and how they needed a food or a restroom break. There were these hidden rules that regulated where they could eat or relieve themselves. So this is during segregation. Ruth's mother shared with her a green book that explained these rules to help protect the family and families like Ruth's family. And although this is a fictional story, the Green Book itself is an actual text there in the middle that many African-American families and entertainers routinely use to assist them in making travel decisions that kept them safe and alive. And of course, I don't know if you've seen the movie, The Green Book, but it is based off of the Green Book in the middle, not Ruth's Green Book. But that's part of this, this strategy here. And it overlaps with preparation for bias and promotion of mistrust. And with these racial socialization tenets, they do overlap with one another, as do many of the aspects of racial socialization. And this here, there's a documentary, I don't know if you've heard of it, done by PBS called Driving While Black. And they do talk about the Green Book and race, space, and mobility in America. And I showed this to my CPE group this past summer as a part of our curriculum. Nobody got shot by the police. That's not why I did it. I did it because it's important to do, regardless of what's going on in society at whatever time. They're seeing African-American patients. They're visiting with people who have these kinds of concerns. They were wondering and wanted to talk about race, and was a group of 3 white students. And so we watched this and had some great dialogue and discussion about it afterwards. So take a moment to think about African-American students or clients that you've had and who've struggled to trust you with their stories, struggled to trust you with their feelings. Now, on the one hand, many CPE students and clients are going to begin this new therapeutic or educational and supervisory relationship a little tentative and nervous, sure. But the difference that I want to point out is that as it pertains to African-American students and clients is that they're racially socialized not to trust, right? And they're racially socialized not to be vulnerable. And in particular in interracial situations. So race is a factor here in ways that wouldn't be the case for white students. They might not trust you, but it's not because they're white, typically. So how do you understand, this dynamic at work as a white supervisor or a white educator working with a student of client of color? How do you understand this dynamic in the context of CPE or a group, CPE group or therapy group where you've got white or Black students or other racial groups represented? Are you sensitive to this dynamic when we're wanting them to share and to be transparent and open and vulnerable? Or do we label that student when they don't share as resistant and not open to trusting the process without considering the depth of the why? So this is can help to really give some context to that. May not be the full answer, but it could be in part. I've had an African-American student who, we're both Black, but I represent the establishment. I represent the man, if you will. So it took a while for that student to open up to me, to feel like we could have trust. And it kind of was like, it was just this, we had to have an open conversation about it because I definitely saw that there was something, not quite as I thought maybe it would be. So I have to think about those things as an African-American educator as well. And then lastly, there's egalitarianism, which refers to the messages that encourage young Black people to value individualized qualities and equality. So it's how parents will foster skills that are going to teach their children how to excel in mainstream society. Hard work, virtue, self-acceptance, equality. These are the things will help you to succeed and to be successful in mainstream America. And it also stresses that young Black people are equal. They're not less than, they're equal to everybody else, and therefore have the right to go to school and to have dreams and have hopes and aspirations. And so that's a very important part of racial socialization, but you see how that can connect with the cultural socialization as well, that egalitarianism. Let's watch this clip. I don't know if you all have ever seen the movie, The Hate U Give, but as you watch, what I want you to do is, as you listen to what's being said, kind of draw on the themes of racial socialization that you see at work in the clip. So let's take a look.
Can you make it louder, Imani?
I can. I was wondering about that. Here, I'm gonna have to, I'll stop. Let me see here. Let me try. Tell me if, thank you for speaking up. Let me know if this works. I'm gonna go back.
Now, when it happens, don't act mad. You gotta look calm. Answer
No,
the
it didn't
question.
really work.
Keep your hands out your pockets. You drop something, leave that shit where it's at.
Never.
That is as loud as my, it's on 100. Can you adjust your volume? Does that help? I'll try. I'll see. I'll play it again.
You gotta look calm. Answer their question.
Money, can you click share sound from your computer?
It is.
When you're
Both of them are
sharing it?
clicked.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Was that not louder for people? Are there other people who can't hear it either?
No, they're putting them in the chat, so I was like, nah.
I cannot hear it either. It helped when I increased my volume.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we're here. What I'll do is I'll just go back a second. Not that far. The joys of technology. We'll get it. Okay. I'm going to try again.
Doctor, does it have closed caption?
It doesn't.
Now, when it happens, don't act mad. You gotta look calm. Answer their questions, but don't tell them nothing extra. Keep your hands out your pockets. You drop something, leave that shit where it's at.
Never.
Leave that stuff where it's at. My bad. Now, one day y'all gonna be with me, and you best bet we gonna get pulled over. I don't mean I did something wrong. Maybe I made a mistake driving, or maybe I ain't do nothing at all. You gonna see me with my hands like this on the dashboard. Come on. Now you keep your hands posted, cause moving makes the police get all nervous. If I ain't with you, you ask for me. It can get real dangerous, so don't argue with them. But keep your hands where they can see them. This is how you gonna act. We straight?
I was 9 years old when I first got the talk. 7, my half-brother, was 10. Sakani was 1.
Now, just because we gotta deal with this mess, don't you ever forget that being black is an honor, because you come from greatness. Now, this is the Black Panther 10-point program. This is our own Bill of Rights. I want you to learn it, because I'm going to ask you about it. I'm going to quiz you.
Really, Maverick?
Know your rights. Know your worth. You understand?
All right. Hopefully, most of you, I hope everybody was able to hear it or listen closely. But that was a clip from The Hate U Give. And so, which just, you know, I'm just wondering, did you identify some racial socialization things in your work with students? Is that Okay, y'all are still there. I got a message saying Zoom quit on me.
We're here. You froze up momentarily as you were asking your questions, and so we couldn't hear what you were asking. Can you try that again?
Sure. I'm wondering what racial socialization themes are present that you saw in the clip, and how these themes shown up in your work with students. And what I'd like you to do is just tuck that away. And so then at the end, when we talk about, when we have comments and questions, if you want to share some of those, you can. So we'll come back to that. Now I think I'm frozen again.
We can hear and see you all right.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes. The questions to consider screen is what we're seeing.
Okay, so this was when I thought we'd have questions, but we will continue on. And the break. So there we go. I was gonna have you all listen to the song on the break. There we go. My cursor was kind of getting stuck there. Okay, so just some benefits and the effectiveness of racial socialization as we continue on, and we'll transition to family systems theory. So it's been shown to have an influential role in determining psychological, educational, behavioral, and social outcomes for young Black kids. And of course, positive identity development, increased self-esteem, better academic achievement, a buffer against the harmful effects of racism, higher levels of self-esteem, really well-developed racial identities, positive socio-emotional functioning, more adaptive anger expression, and fewer externalizing and internalizing problems, and more effective racial coping skills. So these are some of the things that these research studies have brought out around the benefits and the effectiveness of racial socialization. So now we'll move to family systems theory. Family systems theory I'll go back a second, is helpful to understand racial socialization in Black families because it views the family system as a social system and considers the patterns of interaction that exist between family members and the shared history and some degree of emotional bonding and developing strategies for meeting the needs of individuals in the family, as well as the family as a whole. So in order to understand family behavior, family systems theory draws attention to communication, transactional patterns, cohesion between family members, as well as adaptation to the stressors of racial discrimination. So this positions family systems theory quite well, I think, to be used to understand the processes of racial socialization in the family context and the ways in which such practices achieve family goals that promote youth functioning. The parent-child relationship literature, particularly that which is related to racial socialization in children, is an example of how family systems theory can be used to center the analysis of how race and racism in the family has an impact on the family process. So specifically, looking at things like family how all of those things affect minority families. I don't know why this is happening. Okay.
Could you just restate what you said just 2 seconds ago, Imani,
Yeah.
because you broke out?
It appears that we're, Imani, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. You disappeared from the top of the screen there where you were presenting, so I thought maybe you'd kick you off.
Okay, let me see. I'm not sure what's happening, but we'll keep going. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. All right. So in considering the, let me try to remember what I said. I was talking about family systems theory can be really helpful when we think about family rules and goals and inputs and outputs and change. Those concepts of family systems theory can be helpful to frame a lot of the racial socialization issues that come up in families. And so we'll look at a couple of these parent-child of different concepts in the family structure. And we'll also talk about Bowen family systems theory as well. So in considering the parent-child subsystem, parent-child communication obviously is an integral part of the racial socialization process. So parents have specific messages that they want to communicate to their children regarding race and certain relations and realities. A recent study in 2016 drew on relational communication theory, and it observed that racial conversations between children and parents, they found that parents demonstrated advocacy on behalf of their children. So for example, how they would ask to speak with a store manager, or how they would ask to speak to the principal to advocate for their children, while also providing suggestions to their children for how they should handle racial dilemmas. So if you want to ask your teacher if the kid didn't get a good grade on the test, how to ask the teacher to explain the grade to you, how to try to stay calm. So just like Maverick was doing in The Hate U Give, trying to tell the kids, stay calm, because there's safety issues involved. So parents communicate those kinds of things to their children in racial socialization, which kind of goes right to some family systems theory stuff. And then in terms of family cohesion, that refers to the degree of closeness or emotional bonding in a family. So a key concept in family systems theory, this concept can be used to understand the ways in which racial socialization takes place. So there was a study in 2006 done that found that mothers and fathers, their warmth related to each parent's use of cultural socialization and preparation for bias with their adolescent age children. Similarly, results from a study using the early childhood longitudinal study found that parents' perceptions of warmth then predicted their use of cultural socialization. So just more family cohesion around this issue made it easier, and more connectivity made it easier for parents to feel that those conversations could happen, and they did have those conversations. Interconnectedness in family systems theory states that family members' experiences can shape or influence other family members' well-being and family functioning. So in terms of racial socialization, there are many instances where parents' own experience of and characteristics contribute to their racial socialization practices. So Black parents, their identification with and their feeling about racial group identity or their experiences of racial discrimination have been found to be predictors of parents' racial socialization practices. So for example, there was a study in 2010 done where mothers and families who engaged in frequent racial socialization were characterized by high scores on racial pride. So they had a lot of racial pride. They had experienced a lot of barriers based on race, a lot of egalitarian messages, self-worth, and behavioral socialization in their lives, and they reported more frequent experience of racial discrimination, and viewed being Black as an important part of their messaging to their children across all dimensions. Similarly, Black fathers who view race as central to their identity and experience, and having had more racial discrimination in their lives, were more likely to engage their children around racial socialization. In terms of the parent-child subsystem, age and gender can be a factor in terms of racial socialization methods that are employed, what age they're employed. So for example, results from a sample of working to middle class parents found as they were raising their adolescent children that the mothers were more engaged with cultural socialization compared to the fathers. Further, mothers reported engaging in more cultural socialization, excuse me, in preparation for bias with other siblings in comparison, I need water, to younger siblings, excuse me. Sorry about that, a lot of talking. Okay. I think I'm okay. In terms of boundaries in the African American context, boundaries are really permeable and may undergo significant change over time. But that can be something that's really different in understanding how Black families function and how they work. Boundaries and hierarchies in family systems, they regulate the flow of information, what information enters into the system and what information exits the system, as well as information that is exchanged within the family system. So boundaries can exist as a continuum of permeability that ranges from open or information that can freely travel in this and out the system to closed, where information may not travel in and out of the system very easily or at all. So within the family, the hierarchy, and I'll talk about this, I'll actually skip and go to another slide. I'll talk about hierarchy a little bit more in a minute. Family rules. So every family has rules, and this family system theory concept has to do with behaviors of the system itself and any subcomponent of the system. So these might be explicitly stated and known, or they might operate implicitly, but are generally understood by members of the family and are regulated interactions across subsystems. So in the African American family context of racial socialization, rules are going to refer to the process of African American families socializing their children to the rules in the external world that result from racist ideologies and structures. So the notion of family rules is present not in the sense of sort of intra-system interactions, although they are present, but in terms of racial socialization, it's all about what the information in the external world and the experiences in the external world are going to govern the rules that family create as they socialize their children around race. So this process is essential for African Americans because parents realize that there are rules in place in society that place their children in harm's way. Again, the talk is a perfect example of that. More specifically, the rules exist because of the ubiquitous racism in society. And so educating their children about these rules prepares them for the unequal treatment, preparation for bias as well, that they will inevitably experience. So that's how family rules can work. Change. Because race and racism are dynamic concepts, racial socialization involves parents needing to continually monitor changes in the ways that racism manifests itself in society. And then they alter their socialization practices as a result. So an example would be changing laws and social norms. Those are continually monitored by parents, despite the fact that, for example, interracial relationships are typically legal, right? They're legal. You can get married to anybody you want of a different race. There still remains subtle and not so subtle ways of such relationships being frowned upon, not accepted, discriminated against in this country. So as a result, despite the legal changes, parents must still prepare their children for entering into such relationships and attempt to protect them from potentially negative effects. So changes in these socialization practices enables parents to continually and effectively equip their children with the ability to really navigate successfully these continually modified racial barriers. So I'll share an example from my personal life. When I have a son who just turned 26 last week, believe it or not, but when he was 12, my husband and I decided that it was time for us to talk to him about what happened to Emmett Till. So we found a PBS documentary and we watched it. And Emmett Till, of course, is the Black young man who was murdered by a group of white men while visiting his relatives in Money, Mississippi, for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Given our son's age in relation to Emmett Till's age when he was murdered, and the value that we placed as parents in racial socialization, we sat down and we watched the documentary. We had discussion. Later on in his high school time, he dated a white young lady, and then he dated a white young lady in college, and we kept coming back to that documentary and that conversation And he had experiences out in public with these young ladies at different points where that education was helpful to him. And he told us that. So that's an example. Family goals. All families operate with goals in mind for their system. These goals can be written, they can be unwritten, but it's the goals that regulate how the family is going to operate. They change over time as family members age, they change. Cultural socialization is a big part of the goal, right? To educate Black children about what it means to be Black, so that they know who they are, that they can be proud of themselves and their heritage, that they're taught their history. That's a goal for a lot of African-American families. So that's an example of how that works. I've got inputs and outputs here, which refer to information and resources that come into the family, and then information that the family sends to entities outside of the boundaries of the family. So families engage in an ongoing process of maintaining these internal interactions and balancing the flow of information that's coming in and out. This homeostatic process is really designed to help to maintain balance, right, and equilibrium in a family. Egalitarianism reflects this family system concept of output in the sense that what families provide to the external world just around helping their children to develop skills that will help them to be successful in mainstream society. That's output. I can remember so many times as a Black person, I was taught, you're not going to go out here and represent us any kind of way. You're Black, you need to represent yourself. You need to be dressed properly, and you need to articulate yourself and speak well to be able to function in mainstream society. So that's an example of that. And then finally, I'll talk about feedback loops. So given the fact that family systems are dynamic systems, they continually monitor their status, particularly as the family seeks to reach equilibrium based on its goals. So see how these are interconnected. When the family's patterns are out of sync with family goals, new patterns are going to emerge that help the family to achieve equilibrium again. This ecological characteristic of racial socialization reflects, the feedback loops in that the external environment will transmit information to the family, and that might serve as a warning signal to parents regarding how much or how little racial socialization is needed to help to promote healthy development of their children. So that's, those are those concepts and kind of how they fit in terms of that general family systems theory. I also want to turn our attention to a way to expand and to add to how we can think about some of these concepts around historical time and choice. So basically, there were some researchers who really thought about how the notion of time, historical time and choice experience in the dynamic systems of an African-American family, how those things affect the system, how history and choice affect the family system, the Black family systems specifically. So they refer to time in a historical and temporal sense, specifically that systems are historically contextualized in both the broader system in which they are embedded and in the history of the system itself and its subcomponent history. So from this perspective, change in a system is embedded not only in its historical experiences, but also in the broader societal structures in which it's situated. And because systems have some level of agency, right, they can adapt in ways that change the process or organization of the system. The difference with African-American people is that the structure of race and racism, although it allows for change over time, these structures typically change to fit the needs of the interests of those in power across historical periods. So this theory, and any theory that we use, it has to be able to adapt to these changing ideologies, especially in the way that they directly influence and impact family system. So the way to kind of address this is to think about historical time and how it allows for family systems theory to conceptually incorporate empirical data regarding how race and racism have had an impact on the social locations of the families in contemporary society. So, for example, you can look at policy. So by the end of the 19th century, 80% of African-American families were headed by two-parent families. This figure dropped to 64% by 1970, right? And today is less than 40, according to Pew Research Center. And Pew also found that African-American families have the lowest percentage of two-parent family households when you compare them across other ethno-racial groups. So the difference can be explained, one way to explain it is economic factors being the main drivers of change among African-American families. So economic decisions in the mid-20th century that provided vast opportunities for European-American families simultaneously stripped away those opportunities from working Black families, like providing government contracts to European-American families and businesses while restricting those same contracts for African-American families and businesses. That impacts the family, and it's something that has happened over the course of time. Another policy is mass incarceration. So the current number of single-parent families, typically single mothers, but not all, and the increase in grandparent-headed families, right? So that kinship care, have been fueled by mass incarceration policies. Disproportionate number, obviously, of African-American men and women are incarcerated. So this distorts marriage markets. It removes working men and women from the home. Law enforcement policies like drug sentencing guidelines, stop and frisk policing, law and order movement, government-supported prison industrial complex, all of these things over the past 50 years have changed the structure of the African-American family. So that's history. So let's talk about choice and how we can incorporate these ideas into family systems theory and how we understand how families, African-American families are functioning, how they're structured, and how they do what they do every day. So choice. African-Americans make their racial identities both individually and collectively, not under conditions of their own choosing. In addition, the concepts of race are formed and altered at the state and national level of government. Census data that has ethno-racial categories that people self-select. Such formal, and then that determines what communities get funding for certain things. Formal structures provide mechanisms for internalizing beliefs about racist ideology, which manifests in practice and systemic inequality across social institutions. So the history and the structure of race and racism is such that state, local policies have resulted in altering the organization of families, right? Which affects families having little choice sometimes in this matter. So for an example, African-American slave families existed under constant threat of spouse and child being sold away by their slave owners. Because African slaves brought to America were considered property and could be sold by their owners, the slave didn't have a choice of self-organization of their families, right? So these decisions as to who was bred and who would bring about profit were more important than allowing slaves to structure their own family, and therefore they could not. But there are other current day examples like school choice, right? And where people live and where their children can go to school really impacts the trajectory of, a lot of times, of people's lives in so many ways. So choice links directly to racist structures and ideologies that have an economic, political, and social impact on a family, which is then going to impact the social structure of that family. So this is why history is important to consider, and this is why choice is important to consider. So we'll move on to Bowen, and then I'll have some practical suggestions for clinicians, and then we'll be all done. And I wish we had even more time. So Bowen family systems theory, which is a theory that I use all the time. It's all about understanding how families are structured and how they operate, how they deal with imbalance, how they deal with the transmission of emotional ways of being throughout over time, how to understand complex extended family networks can be seen within the context of this theory, even though the way that it has been created, it really focuses on, again, the quote unquote nuclear family. But there are ways to really think about this theory and expand beyond it. So for example, I found myself sometimes struggling with the notion of differentiation when working with Bowen family systems theory, because my experience being an African-American is that there's more of a collectivism, and this whole notion of differentiation and autonomy, I get it and I understand it, and I also understand that it doesn't quite fit always within context of people who, for as long as African Americans have been here, have functioned in a very, very collective manner when it comes to decision making, when it comes to so many things. And that might, not considering that and having an appreciation for that, might make someone assess another person as being undifferentiated, fused with their family, as opposed to putting that person in the context of history and choice and time. And then in African-American families, sometimes a person who becomes differentiated, sometimes they do that in a way that other family members might consider as an act of desertion. How could you leave us? You think you're better than us. You leave in the community and you think, oh, I'm just trying to be differentiated, trying to be connected and autonomous, but there are certain markers and other ways in which people may think that differentiation, it feels like, and it may be like something else. And that happens with white families and other families too. But again, some of it has to do with, for African Americans, there's this racial component of, you know, you don't want to be a sellout. You don't want to be called an Uncle Tom if you separate yourself from either the family or certain behaviors of the family. So there can be some interesting dynamics around differentiation and autonomy as it relates to race. In terms of sibling position, I was reading a study that looked at racial socialization, and basically, you know, you can have siblings in a family who might experience racial socialization practices differently. Like, for example, I kind of alluded to this earlier, there can be more energy around some racial socialization concepts for young Black men because of the fear of a police-involved shooting and those sorts of things, that there might be more energy that flows to that son, and the daughter may not get that same level of attention, which may or may not cause problems. Sometimes it has to do with age as well. You know, you're going to tell a 5-year-old, or like in the video, the little baby was even hearing about racial socialization. So some of those things can impact sibling dynamics. In terms of the family projection process of family systems theory, so, and there's a video I'm going to show you all in just a moment about this. But just this, you know, that children, as in the case of with a white family or any other family, might become the focus of parental anxiety that may transfer across and through generations. That child might develop symptoms. That happens in the African-American context in a variety of ways. Because I was a teenage mother, my son was born when I was 16. When my son turned 15 and a half, I started becoming very anxious because I didn't want him to be a teen mother like me. And I just found myself projecting that onto him, that energy onto him. And I hadn't begun to learn a bit about this, I was able to kind of recognize it. But that's something that happens in an African-American family. These things that happen to us based on, you know, sometimes everyday experience, sometimes experiences that run a little deeper, can then impact how we're relating to, or history can repeat itself. My mother had a baby when she was 16. My grandmother had her first child when she was 15. So, you know, that family projection process. And then in the multi-generational transmission process. So this is, you know, the genogram essentially, tracing family patterns and behaviors across generations, and, you know, happenings and things like that. The strong and complex extended family networks of African Americans really should be considered in this. So that's one thing that's important. that sometimes might get missed, really not understanding the significance of, you know, Big Mama or the lady across the street as a part of the family. And can you put that person on your genogram because of the role that they had in the family? Do we have room on our genograms and those assignments to make for those situations? And in terms of the CPE process or the therapeutic process, developing an alliance of trust, which might take some time, is important even before doing genograms, because there just might not be a sense of trust. There might be some suspicion. I do the genogram, I just inherited this timeline with other educators here, but I found it beneficial to do it in Unit 2, especially when I have students of color, because we have the time to build the trust. It isn't always automatic, and it just takes some time. Emotional cutoff occurs in every family. And when it comes to African Americans, it really shows up around socioeconomic issues a lot, not just that, but the achievement and the maintenance of middle class status might lead to an emotional cutoff from the family of origin. You know, you got a Black professional whose extended family has sacrificed to help him or her move to the middle class. And then the dilemma is centered on the expectation that that professional will in turn now help the family. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. And that can cause some tension in a family. And this is what I was pointing at earlier around the first question that I was asked, that sometimes when we think about Black wealth and the acquisition of resources and success, the family can be positively or adversely impacted by that, frankly. And then I was sharing earlier a bit about about boundaries and just how permeable they are in the African American context, and how it's important to consider that. And it may look different, it may feel not okay, but it's an important thing to consider. So the next thing I want to talk about is colorism in the African American community and the family projection process. Just thinking about how things pass from one generation to the next. The word doesn't really exist. It's not in the dictionary. Autocorrect every time I try to type it in my notes. But Alice Walker, she really defined this word, colorism. And it's African American people really being treated differently by each other based on their skin color, their skin tone specifically. Light skin preference has been common practice in the African American community, going back to slavery, when the lighter skinned slaves were allowed to be in the house and the darker skinned slave worked in the field. The lighter skinned slaves were deemed to be, who were the products of sexual exploitation, were deemed to be prettier and more and easier on the eyes. So colorism, it's not just an African American thing. It happens in the Caribbean, Latin America, East and Southeast Asia, and in Africa. But it's really, really important, I think, to know, because it's huge even now in the Black community. Children of the same mother and father can vary considerably in its appearance and skin color. That can cause sibling rivalry. So now kind of back to some Bowen ideas around sibling position and things like that. There could be rivalry, the light-skinned child and the dark-skinned child. And so that's a way to kind of expand how we think about some of the issues that happens with siblings in a family. A child can sometimes be lighter or darker than the parents. They can resemble an ancestor, just genetics. And sometimes this, just can cause tension in the family. And they can project that, depending on who the person is that they look like, project that onto the children. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play two videos real quick. One is called Dark Girls and one is called Light Girls. And this does affect Black men. I just want you to know. But it's the study of it. I think a lot of it is focused on Black women. So let's take a look at this.
There's no volume, Imani.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's because I started over. I'm gonna do it again. Thank you for letting me know that. I was enjoying myself.
And I used to hate him because of
I'm gonna go back.
I can remember being in the bathtub, asking my mom to put bleach in the water.
I'm trying to rewind here. I'll do this.
Show me the ugly child. Show me the good-looking child.
I don't like to be called black because I'm not black.
Skin color amongst the Black community is a huge issue.
Our sisters are trying to lighten themselves.
I took my color after my father, and I used to hate him because of it.
I can remember being in the bathtub, asking my mom to put bleach in the water so that my skin would be lighter.
This is not just a U.S. phenomenon.
One of the most popular products in the third world is skin whitening cream.
I don't really like dark-skinned women. They look funny beside me.
Some people, when they see a dark-skinned woman, they just like, there's nothing to her.
For so long, Black women would try to emulate the beauty ideals of white women.
I went to Africa once. I saw me walking all over the place. Except, I mean black, I mean real black. It made ink look light. It was black.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, will defend the Constitution of the United States.
There is a Black woman who is dark-skinned in the White House. She's not cleaning, she's not cooking, she's the First Lady.
I feel really, really, really good that I've forgiven my parents.
You're not your hair. You're not your skin. You are the soul that lives within.
The darker the fruit gets,
the sweeter the juice.
My mother, she's bragging on me. She said, my daughter is beautiful. And then she adds, could you imagine if she had any lightness in her skin at all? She'd be gorgeous.
I think the impact that colorism has on young girls, light girls and dark girls, leaves scars on the soul that live well into womanhood.
From a very young age, then, I was made to feel that something about what I had or looked like was somehow both special and yet disliked, hated. Something to be embraced and or fear.
I had rocks thrown in my head. I had, you think you cute, I should cut your hair off. Like 2 ponytails, they wanted to cut one of my ponytails off. I'm going, why? Why do you even care? What is the big deal? And I think that we're not taught to value one another enough.
The colorism that exists in our community was sometimes as damaging as racism, because it hurts more when it's coming from your own.
There were times, especially as a child, where I suffered unnecessarily and felt a lot of shame about being light, about having long hair. And I'm sure that it feels like, you know, oh, poor little you, white girl, you know, everybody was kind of paying attention to you. But, you know, the lightness of my skin didn't insulate me from questioning my worthiness of being Black.
There were perceptions. Oh, you're stuck up. You're bougie.
No matter what I did, what I said, I was either thinking I'm too white. I thought I was white. I thought I was better than everybody else. You know, whatever. I just thought I was all these things, and I never thought I was any of those things. So it made me not like myself.
Colorism. Very, very, very painful in the African American community. The brown bag test, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, prominent professor at Harvard and historian, described going to college as an undergrad at Yale in the 60s. And some people came and invited him to a party. And in order to get in, you had to pass the brown paper bag test. So if you were lighter than the brown paper bag, as the picture indicates, you could get in. And if you weren't, you didn't get in. And there continue to be struggles in the African American community about that today. And it's rooted in slavery, and it's still very much alive and well today. And so Spike Lee, a movie director, back in 1988, he made a movie that really highlighted colorism in the Black community called School Days. And this picture here is of the light-skinned girls. They got a W on their shirts for wannabe, and the darker girls have the J's on their just for jigaboo. These are racist terms, racial terms. And he even put the light-skinned girls in a hotel and had them waited on hand and foot, and not so with the darker girls for the movie to really build on the intensity. But he was getting at, and nobody had made a movie or really talked about colorism in this way, in such a public way before, but he was really pointing to this very significant and challenging aspect of colorism and racial identity in the Black community. So if you just thinking about this in a CPE or therapeutic context, if you've got a, let's say this case here, William, he's 20. He was chased home from school in a suburban all-white neighborhood by a group of white children. They called him the N-word. They dared him to fight back. And ever since then, you know, he just wanted to blend in. He wore glasses. He didn't need them. It dressed in a nondescript way, tried hard to avoid recognition. So put William in CPE group. Put William at your hospital and tell him to be assertive and to walk in his pastoral authority and to assert himself in the group maybe where there are white students there, and just kind of thinking about what that might mean for William, understanding this idea of colorism. William may have children and might pass that on to through his children through that family projection process. So this is just, again, another way to kind of think about how people are situated and the impact of this kind of stuff on them. Here's another example of a person who was told that she was too dark to wear a particular color. You're too dark to wear red. The questions that she was being asked: whose little Black child are you? Who knows who you belong to? Her same insecurities, being a darker skin. So again, you know, you put somebody in a context in therapy and you want them to share, or you want to know why they don't feel good about themselves and how that's spilling over into their work life and how that's spilling over into their intimate relationships. I mean, these kinds of things do matter. Colorism definitely does matter. So I'm aware of the time, and here's some books that I have here that speak to colorism as well. So we're at time. There's just one more thing I want to share with you. And then we'll open it up for questions. So I'm going to skip through several slides to get at some practical application. There we go. Okay. So there are, Nancy Boyd Franklin has developed a therapeutic axis that I thought I would just mention very, very quickly as you're starting and engaging in new relationships with African-American people. You know, just understanding, you know, that trust is going to be hard right out the gate. And so just being aware of that and just working at first to join them and connect with them and engage without trying to get too deep too quickly, because that doesn't always work well. So joining them is really important, and then making the initial assessment is mostly observations, just trying to figure out what's going to be, you know, helpful for them based on things, simple things like who shows up at the therapy session, or who gets talked about and who doesn't get talked about. Just these observations to kind of start to get a feel for the family dynamics as opposed to asking directly. So using your assessment skills to find out relevant information about the family. And you can always, as trust is developed, ask directly when it's more appropriate. Problem solving is important from a systems perspective. Many African-American families in treatment, they might present as multi-problem families, and they might feel overwhelmed with all the problems that they have. So your job would be to give clear attention early on to identifying how the problems are prioritized for them, not how you prioritize them, but how they're prioritized for that person, and help them to identify what those problems are and journey with them as they seek resolution. Or when you're working with a student, same thing. What are the things that are most alive and important for them? Even you might not think it's important. You may not think colorism is important, but it is, for example. Family enactment. Mnuchin stresses the importance of encouraging families to interact with each other and reenact sometimes the family drama. And sometimes that might be helpful for Black families who are new to therapy, giving them using a different approach because it is so new. Then gathering the information, that's the genogram. And like I said earlier, in fact finding, not just the genogram, but that might be something you just kind of toe that line and wait on after pretty extensive joining them and initial attention in the assessment and some problem solving. Then you build some credibility and they might be more willing to share. And then finally is restructuring the family, which is really just looking at a multi-systems model on this axis too, at all the various subsystems. You're going to look at the family and the extended family and the non-blood family, like I talked about earlier, the fictive kin, the church family and social service agency. So really being able to understand this whole Black person from all the various systems as opposed to just one or two systems. So as I close, for you all, therapists, supervisors, developing self-knowledge as an educator and as a supervisor, your own self-knowledge, critiquing your personal, racial, and cultural identity and history, considering any countertransference that might happen is important, analyzing all of those things, and developing a knowledge of and appreciation for African-American stylists and Black folk do things different. And it's important to be aware of that and appreciate, not criticize, but appreciate their style. And that might be how they talk, linguistic stylings, spiritual and religious realities, collectivist identities. So we talked about that earlier, movement expressions, just the way that African-Americans engage. If you don't know how to appreciate that, try to learn how to find out more information and appreciate those things. Assessment of culturally relevant strategies. So no one size fits all in terms of a strategy. So really thinking about what is important here in this moment and what is my style as a supervisor, not to become something that you're not, or as a therapist, but determining the emotional intensity, the developmental appropriateness, the amount of racial socialization that's happened, like those kind of things will help you with your interventions and your strategies. And then lastly, integrate any sort of culturally relevant treatment strategies then into practice. So you have to learn what those are. Talking to the client or family or student about racism. Maybe that's something you haven't felt comfortable with, but maybe that's the thing that's alive and important for them. Helping families, clients, students understand, explore how they set priorities about situations that might call for a direct response or sometimes for an indirect response. Sometimes we might be pushing them to be more direct. Well, maybe there's some culturally sensitive reasons why that might not be helpful. And so being aware of that kind of thing is important. And then using dynamic sizing to determine, do you do treatment as usual, or do you offer treatment or interventions tailored toward a diversity factor? Just figuring that out would be helpful, and being flexible in considering whether you might generalize diversity knowledge or if it needs to be individualized to that person. And then finally, recognize the unique tensions related to power dynamics in the wider world and between yourself and your client or your student, that power dynamic is always at play. And I know we all know that, but sometimes, are we really aware of it, particularly when things get tense or when the connection isn't happening, just to really, and sometimes it's just a matter of talking about it. I just have developed the practice of just kind of talking to my students about that early on, just to get it out there, because it's a dynamic and it's real and it's present. So those are there are many other things that isn't comprehensive, but those are some practical applications I think that could be helpful for therapists and supervisors alike. So with that, we'll open it back up and I'll stop sharing my screen to some dialogue and some questions or conversation in the time that we have left.
Great. Thank you so much, Imani. And just want to remind folks to use the raise hands feature under the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen.
Jeffrey White.
So just two quick questions. First one, is there a bibliography or works cited page that could be emailed so that we can do our own further research? Because I know you said there were some things we didn't get to. Okay.
Yes, I'm going to make this slide deck and a bibliography available to anybody who would like it.
Okay. And then second question, could you share a way to integrate some of these cultural competencies in a critical care setting? Because we talked about like therapeutic, as well as like supervisory settings. But I would be curious, like, for example, like in an emergency department situation where like you have police officers coming in or like nurses who may not have certain competencies or different things like that. Could you share maybe a story or something that you've experienced in your own life about how you've integrated these cultural competencies?
Yeah, sure. There's so many stories. I mean, working where I work at OSU Medical Center in Columbus, it's a very diverse, hospital. You've got people, staff members, and patients alike from all walks of life, all racial, ethnic backgrounds. So inevitably, you're going to encounter people who are different, and no one can know everything about every culture, right? So one of the things that I like to do is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Emmanuel Lartey's concept of interculturality, where, basically there are 3 spheres of being. All of us human beings are like every other human being, right? This universality of what it means to be human. We all hurt, we all feel, we all hunger, nobody wants to be in the hospital, nobody likes the food, so we all can connect around that. And then every human being is like some other human beings, their tribe, their family, their people, where they come from. So as much as, some things, there might be some things about my parents I don't like. I have to admit that there's some ways of being that I have that are like them, and there's no getting around it, right? I can just manage it better. But I'm like my people, or as an African-American person. Am I like every African-American person? No, but there are just some things. There's a swag I think that people of color have that we just got that. And that's just a part of who we are. We are fashion sense, or just things like that. So we share that in common. But then everybody's like no one else, right? Everyone is a unique individual. There is not a person, Jeffrey, like you, or Mark like you. And to hold those 3 spheres of being in tension at the same time. So when you encounter someone, when you visit someone, can you acknowledge all of those things at the same time when you visit? So that, okay, here's a person, they're a Black person. I'm Black, so maybe I know something about that, but I don't know them. And there's some unique things that they present with that I can be aware of. And they're a human being who has a story. And I'm here to listen to their story. Now, I might be culturally sensitive around some things, like if I'm visiting a Muslim patient, if you're a male and the hijab is not on, then, there's some things that you might, some limitations maybe, or some considerations that you're going to have. So being able to balance all of that at the same time, part of that is learning about cultures as much as you can, reading, watching documentaries, and befriending people. A person is not a book, and a book is not a person. So learn stuff and then connect with people who are from those cultures to really learn in real time and in a human way, who they are. So I think those kinds of things can really help when we're in situations with folks cross-culturally. So if I've visited families who were African-American, very demonstrative in their grieving in ways that cause some of our white staff to feel uncomfortable. And of course they call security or they call the chaplain. And so how can I sort of be a buffer and be present with the family and also say to the staff, I mean, for me, if they're not hurting anybody, hurting themselves or damaging the building, give them a minute to grieve. And it's okay. They're not going to do that for 2 hours. They're just in shock right now. And so I think those are some ways you educate the staff, you are empathetic to the patients, you understand that the staff may be stressed as well with that family, but you give them the space to grieve and be them. They'll never get that moment again. So does that help to answer your question? I hope it does.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Yes.
Carrie Finnegan.
Carrie,
Maybe in the, hi, haven't seen you in a while. This may be in your bibliography, but I was wondering if there are resources for white families who are raising Black children. As I may miss some of those socialization things.
Yes. That definitely in my bibliography, which you all will get.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Ted Hodge.
Hi, Ted.
Hi, Monty. Thank you so much for this presentation. This is just excellent. One of the areas where I found myself having to sort of look again was several of the students I've had over the years that were African American was around the issue of self-care. And, you know, having too many irons in the fire, be too busy and so forth. And I remember one of my students at one point saying, you know, you and the other chaplains here, you can have one job and that you can pay for your college, your kids to go to college, et cetera. For me, I have to have several jobs to be able to do the same thing you're able to do with one job. I mean, that's not necessarily across the board, but it made me a little bit more aware. And I kept bumping into that on several occasions when I would push them about being overly busy. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about maybe how to balance that out with, you know, self-care is important on the one hand, but how to be realistic.
Yeah, that's tough. I resonate with you very much. I resonate with you just personally myself, but there are these very harsh economic realities. You know, there's that saying that in racial socialization, you know, Black folks have to work twice as hard to get half as much, you know, and that's true. I mean, there's just no way around that reality. That is the truth. And yet at the same time, to your point, self-care is important. And it's a concept for folks who have been raised in the struggle and have been trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. That sounds for some people like a privilege that they may not have. And so, I mean, I think as I have, I was just doing a Bible study group with my church ladies about this very thing. There's this book entitled Too Heavy a Yoke, Black Women and the Burden of Strength by Shaniqua Walker Barnes. And she challenges this notion of the strong Black woman, never caring for yourself, running yourself into the ground, no good for anybody. And she really does challenge that, but she traces the history back. And I keep saying slavery, but that's where it goes. And just really helping to unpack that. So I think sometimes people don't understand how deep it goes for them. And perhaps, I know is the case with the women I worked with at church, really reading that book together. We read it slow. We read it over like 7 months and chewed on it. And that really gave them some different perspectives. And when they go to the doctor, because this is what happened with Dr. Barnes, she accomplished PhD, educated woman, psychologist and all that. And she had some significant health problems that kind of shook her. And she realized that that stemmed from her working, achieving, doing. And that wasn't serving her well. So I think really helping to educate people, not just go take a run, go do yoga, but like what historically, back to that history and time, why do you do that? What do you understand about your cultural background and heritage that informs this work ethic that you have? Yeah. And are there ways to reframe and reimagine what it looks like to be successful and to take care of yourself at the same time?
Yeah, thank you. Just one other quick example. I had a resident at one point who stayed pretty quiet in IPR and so forth. And he was also pastor of a church. So I went to hear him one Sunday, and I mean, he was just dynamic in his presentation. Yeah. So when he came back, I said, how come, I called him by name. I said, you know, how come you're so much there? And then when you get back here, you know, we don't hear much from you. He says, I have to save it up. He was humorous about it, but I think just going to hear him helped to build some trust too. You know, seeing him in a different, seeing people in a different context sometimes helps in their own context. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, I think I've heard that before. Yeah. They call me in preaching the quiet storm. Like I'm very quiet and unassuming, but when I get into a zone, whatever it is, boom, there I go. But it's my environment. It's where I feel comfortable, where I feel safe. Yeah. I'm glad that you went, because I think that probably meant a lot to that student, that you would go and to show up and to enter into his world. Because I think that also does help to bridge divides and create understanding when we enter into the world of someone else through humility. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have Jill and then Moses, and that will end our questions. So Jill.
Yeah,
Hi,
thanks,
Jill.
Amana. Yeah, thank you so much. This is really rich. I appreciate it. I appreciate you bringing up colorism. I have a Black student who shared that he does feel like being lighter skinned. There's some he's not accepted in some circles as much. And I'm wondering, I want to give him space to share more about that and the pain and his feelings about it. And at the same time, I don't want to make him be the person who is teaching me. And I'm wondering if you have any guidance on how best to navigate those kinds of things where I want to create space, but not be, make someone teach me.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to do is do a little bit of educating of yourself first. And then you say, hey, Bob, I watched this great documentary and I read a couple books about this because I saw that you were struggling with this. And I really wanted to learn more on my own first. And I didn't want you to teach me. I wanted to take responsibility and ownership to find out more for myself. But, I really want to hear from you, just to add, to what I've learned, because I can't learn everything in a book. So I always appreciate when people, particularly white folks, when they do the work first, and that lets me know they've got skin in the game, they're invested, and they're not going to put it all on me. I'm much more willing to journey with someone when I know that they care enough and are interested enough and humble enough to do some of the work on their own. So I think you taking that first step communicates to him that you're invested and you're not going to make him the responsible party in trying to work with him and figure this out.
Thank you. That is excellent. Thank you.
Okay, and Moses.
All right, Moses, you got the last word here. Last question.
Yeah, I'm just going to be brief because I'm just so proud of just listening to Dr. Imani Jones, just bringing those everything about what we need to know. And I hope, just like many of you have said, that this is going to be a very important curriculum in the ACPE program in the future as we begin to look for the best practice. Thank you for enlightening all of us. I'm also been working on family system theory. I know you know that. But part of what I've been struggling with over the years is around application. We can get theories clearly defined. We can talk about racial concept, how to socialize racially. How do I do color blend? And I think about the unique situation of my own experience, not only dealing with racial socialization, I'm also dealing with, some baggage I brought from Nigeria, which is tribalism. And now I have 3 adult children who I have to do my own RPR with every day or every week. And you all know what I'm saying about that. So the challenge has always been, how do we make this theory? For example, we talk about self-differentiation, which is the goal of every family system practitioner. It's a lifelong dream. And our goal is to self-differentiate. So, and in the process, myself, bringing the baggage of tribalism, struggling with racial discrimination in this country, I struggle with that. And sometimes I have to just forget all this theoretical construct because it doesn't really fit into what I'm experiencing in the reality of my day-to-day life. I have boss, all of them are white. Most of the time I work among the students who are white. Maybe I only get one African and I'm the only Black man, so Black that I could see that I'm very unique in their midst. I go to church, almost the same thing. I'm living in the neighborhood where only my wife and my children, because the 3 children, they've left the house now, so we have emptiness. So it's just so difficult for me to live the reality of what it means to be an African or an African American in this dynamic. So I want to check with you, Manny, what has been your own experience when you are living to the reality? Because theory is one thing, but day-to-day challenges we face in the work, at home, in the church, and every social life, have you been dealing with that? Because I really want to learn from you.
Yeah, well, gosh, it's we have to have a Zoom coffee because it's really hard all the time. And I think one of the things that's really been helpful to me, I mean, my experience is different from yours, but you know, learning that there are resources out there and that there are opportunities to step outside of the Eurocentric Western box helps me to feel, I guess, a bit more encouraged and empowered in doing this work. But also having community of people who look like me, who I can regularly talk to about these things in an unfiltered way, really does help me. When I was in residency, just struggling with what is CPE and where does Imani as a Black woman fit in this, and just what's my voice, and am I allowed to speak in it? Am I going to get in trouble? You know, what's going to happen to me? I found a Black female therapist, and she worked with me for years, and I just got a lot of found a lot of support in having a space where those therapeutic interventions could happen, and they were happening with me in a way that resonated with who I was specifically as a Black woman. But I mean, it's a struggle every day. It's that Du Boisian double consciousness all the time of viewing myself as who I am, knowing that I'm also being viewed by other people differently, going to meetings where I know I'm the only one, not sure when to speak or not. I mean, just all of that. So, I mean, I don't have an answer for you, just joining, you know, you in how challenging it is to navigate what it means to be Black. And then you've also got your Nigerian culture. I'm encouraged by what ACPE is doing. I'm encouraged by the conference we just had in May and the topics, and I'm encouraged by being invited here and other spaces and other things that are happening. My fear is always that the momentum, once the moment dies down, so will everything else. So I hope we're able to keep the momentum going, not just about African-American culture, but Asian culture and Muslim culture, humanist culture, and ideology. Just all of those things are so important. And I think we're in a moment where expanding on multiple levels will serve us well and will preserve the life of our organization.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the most challenging part for me, which I'm still researching on it, is when my 28-year-old woman now, who is my daughter, look at me one day and say, "You are too white, Moses." I just felt so bad. I was driving to work. I was almost shedding tears, whether I've even lost my own identity, even for my own Black 3 children. So I guess part of what you are sharing is a lot of emotion for some of us that are colored. We are Black, but at the same time, I don't think people are looking at us Black just because we are so acculturized. We are almost becoming like white, even though we have Black skin.
One of the multi-layers and the complexity of what it means to be a person of color. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Moses.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here and participating. And I really appreciate just the time. It's fed me as well, just being here with all of you. And if you want to reach out, you can. My email's there, and I'd be happy to chat. I'd be happy to whatever. And I'll get the research. I'll send the information to Mark, and he'll send it on to everybody who's been here and registered and all that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm saying words here and realize I don't have my microphone on. So Imani, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. Really grateful for your presence, the thoughtfulness, and everything that went into the presentation was everything I was hoping it would be, and really grateful for that. So thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
And I know there were a couple of other hands that had for some questions for Imani. Let me encourage you to email her with those, as we are at our time boundary for the day, a little bit over that, in fact. The East Central Community of Practice holds our gatherings twice a year. Our next one will be coming up on the last Friday in February. It's when we typically hold this, Friday, February 25. The topic and presenter are yet to be determined. And for the foreseeable future, we will be a virtual gathering online. I understand from ACPE that in-person meetings are still going to be delayed until sometime later in 2022. So please plan to join us for that. We'll send notes out and have it advertised on the ACPE website and send to our ECCoP distribution list. I want to take a moment just to express some gratitude for our East Central Community of Practice Planning team. Les Small-Stokes, our convener-elect, Cal Brand, Mary Burks, Ben Eiton, Stephanie Maddox-Hill, Clark Eccles, Michelle Walton, for your collaboration in planning and partnering today. Thank you so much for that. And we look forward to the time together planning for next event in February. And finally, as we have mentioned, Imani will have a bibliography and a link to her slide deck. As soon as she gets that sent to me, I will send that out to all of our ECCoP members, as well as registrants who have attended this today, that from outside our community of practice. Also, there are a few folks that got the link sent separately and didn't come through the registration list through ACPE. If you don't get that within a couple of weeks, please email me directly, and I will be glad to send that along to you folks. And that brings us to the conclusion of our time. Thank you for joining with us. For our ECCoP folk, we will continue after lunch. We're going to be migrating over to Teams for some consultation time. We have a couple of folks that have requested consultations, so I emailed that link separately, and please follow that in your emails for the consultations after lunch. Thank you, and go in peace. Have a great day.